Greetings, everyone! And welcome to a very special, challenging 4-player or more edition of Monster Party.
Monster Party! It's challenging, it's tricky, it's skilled.
Almost like some sort of game.
Yes, and speaking of game, who are you, sir?
I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm SHAWN Sheridan.
I'm Larry STROTHE.
And I'm James GONIS.
And for this episode, this is one that we've been looking forward to and dreading, kind of, at the same time, right?
Listeners have been clamoring for this.
Well, they have been.
Busting down our doors.
Because it really is. It's like the one kind of nerd thing that our little core group is not really that familiar with.
Yeah.
I mean, a little
Well,
bit.
it depends.
Kind of, depending on the
Yeah.
format.
Right.
Yes.
It depends on the generation.
But
That's true, yes.
You are. This is so intriguing, sir. What is the topic?
The topic is games.
Games and
Games that
roll
we
the
play.
dice and play.
Board games and
press a
word
button
games
and yes
and mind games.
Insert token.
Video games and CD-ROM games. What we're talking about is games.
anything and everything that is a game. But
Yes.
but how can we possibly do this show?
Well, we can't.
Speaking into the microphone, blah, 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 for 2 hours.
Who could we possibly get as a guest who would be not only appropriate, but ideal to be a guest on this episode?
Ideal.
Tell us, James.
Where do I start? This gentleman,
At the beginning.
this gentleman is a game designer of over 50 video games.
What?
He's partnered with Warner Brothers, DC Comics, Nickelodeon, IDW. He's been an Imagineer at Disney, where he helped create interactive park experiences.
Interactive.
This gentleman has
that.
authored 2 top-selling books on game design
Nice.
Game design.
that are used by universities all over the world.
And now our world.
This man has directed legendary voice talent, including Frank Welker, Tom Kenny,
Oh, my old friend.
and our friend Wally Wingert.
Oh, he's good.
Friend of the show.
Yes.
This gentleman lectures video game design at USC's School of Interactive Media and the New York Film Academy. His current passion is inventing tabletop games, including Rayguns and Rocketships and Pantone the Game.
I love
nice.
rocket ships
Not
and
only
ray
that-
guns.
Make us into a tabletop game.
He has written and drawn and published his own comic book, Bedbug, the Single Father Superhero.
Bedbug.
Nice.
And last but certainly not least, he's a Monster Party listener.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's
let's-
qualified.
Welcome to the show, our special guest, Scott Rogers.
Scott Rogers.
Thanks,
Oh
guys.
my gosh.
This is a
You're
huge
finally
thrill.
here.
I'm finally here after listening to you guys in my car for so long.
Well, how can we possibly top this?
I don't know.
We can't. This will be our last show.
Maybe we can because we have a second guest. Can you believe it? I know, it's amazing. And this is a guest I know pretty well.
You know people?
Yes, I do. And she is a very savvy game player herself.
Tell me more.
She is quite familiar, actually, with gaming old and new, from Atari 2600s to online games to Game Boys, Super
Game
Nintendos, text adventure games,
Text adventures.
board games, and classic 80s video games. She
knows her stuff.
She really does. Please welcome my wife, Gina Sheridan.
Oh my
Thank you.
gosh.
The infamous Gina Sheridan.
It's the best of
right.
both worlds. You got a designer and a player. This is awesome.
You always need a
Aficionado.
And finally, a topic where I know something more than Sean.
That's true.
Oh, yes, you do.
She
Yeah.
knows gaming really well. I mean,
Yeah.
in fact, our 16-year-old nephew, Lucas, who is also quite a hardcore gamer, and we'll get into his stuff a little bit, but she can have like conversations with Lucas, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? No idea. I'm like, yep, sure.
So is it just
Yeah.
going to be Gina and I talking together? You guys are going to leave? Is that what's going to happen?
There'll be a lot of like, that sounds cool.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, she really knows her stuff when it comes to game, and she's because you've dabbled in kind of all of it since from early on,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, since the 70s.
Yeah, yeah. So
And she's played regular game, board games and like
Analog.
traditional game, analog.
right.
So tactile.
Yeah.
Physical.
Spin the
Physical.
bottle.
Spin the bottle. There we go. We're all winners.
well, look. I mean, let's get into this. I mean, you guys, I know you're talking about like advanced electronic stuff, but original games within the genre, science fiction, fantasy.
What was the
horror.
first game?
The first games that
Tag?
No, wasn't that
no.
wasn't that
Kill your neighbor?
If you want to go back to the first game,
here we go.
The first discovered board game is from, I want to say 6000 BC.
Wow.
And that is a copy of backgammon. Now,
Wow.
But we also know that dice were invented before backgammon.
Okay.
But this was the first intact set of board and game and dice that they found together.
I had no idea it was that old.
Oh yeah. I mean, dice goes back even further. Cards are relatively newer. They're from
Right.
I want to say the 600s or so. But yeah, dice and board games go. I mean, there's games like Mancala. There's a game called the Royal Game of or also called 20 Squares.
Like Sumerian?
Like this, Sumerian Yeah, that's
Really?
what it's named
Wow.
after.
I like
they
that.
they found it in the ruins of what they think was and so it's this game called 20 Squares. There's Senate, which I don't know. Did you guys go to the King Tut exhibit not too long ago? They had,
no.
They had
Yeah.
a copy of Senate there.
Yeah.
And that's an ancient game. So there's in the world of tabletop games, there are several different classifications, and one of them is what they call classical games. And so these are and Mancala and backgammon and chess and checkers, which is checkers a very old game also. Things like that they're kind of prehistory games.
Which
Right,
came
right.
first, Chinese checkers or checkers?
Or regular checkers. I think actually regular quote finger quote regular checkers came first.
Is that right?
But what we call Chinese checkers is a variant.
Is it Chinese?
No, it's American.
Okay.
It's back when America named everything after something else.
Wow.
right?
But the heart of it is things like Go and games like that, right?
Okay.
Because the idea of stones on a board that you manipulate around these, they're found all over the world.
Right.
Wherever humans are, they will
Right.
pick up some sort of board or a piece of stone or something and drill into it and manipulate things around. So it's
What about like public stonings? Those are fun games. Was that a game?
it's a dexterity game.
That's like gambling. That's different. That's like, yeah. How long is it going to take for him to expire?
Right, that's betting. That's gaming. That's a whole different. That's a whole different topic.
Right.
Now,
right.
are there games that were ancient games that for some reason they were part of a time that they didn't really make the transition into our age?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's a game that essentially the board is like a snake.
Okay.
And then there are these little carvings of animals that go with it, and they have no idea how to play this game. No, they have all these really cool pieces. They look super cool, and they have no clue.
It's not like Chutes and Ladders.
No, not the board is very distinct. Now remember, back in the ancient times, the board games were metaphors. For example, Senate is a metaphor for crossing over into the afterlife, which is why you find them in tombs.
Okay.
So it's like essentially this tool. So when King Tutankhamun
Yes.
passed away, he was a kid. They put this game into his crypt, his tomb, and they said, you're going to use this. This is if you get good at this game, it'll help you in the passage to the
Okay,
underworld.
was it? Did they seal it in a box? Was it kind of like mint and package when they put it in
no,
there, or was it?
Mint and tomb.
It had been opened, but
Wait, whoa! It was open.
It was opened when they discovered King Tut's tomb.
Okay. Yes, Carter. He opened the packaging and he got the game. No, they've cleaned it up. It looks gorgeous now, but I'm sure they probably made it for his tomb specifically because a lot of the things that end up in the tomb were made for the tomb.
Yeah.
But what does that say about the afterlife, though? Is it like it's not going to be great? We've made some board games,
Right,
for you.
something to liven it up. The funny thing about so there were a couple of copies of Senate in Tut's tomb, and this latest exhibition that they actually had a miniature version, and I looked at it and went, "Oh, look, it's the first travel size game."
That's amazing. Now, what is like the first game that you, Gina, got you into gaming that you can remember right off the top of your head?
I think Candyland was.
Was it Candyland?
Yeah, I think
And you
I think
actually
that was the first
had
one.
that.
Who doesn't like Candyland?
Candyland is a great game to play once. And then once you learn how to take turns and what colors are, then I suggest you throw it away. And there are so many other better games to play now.
But
I think you're over promoting.
but it's got candy in it. It's got nice
Candyland has
pictures.
an interesting history too. It was designed by a woman who worked in a polio ward, I think it was.
wow.
And if you look at the original board
That
of
explains a lot.
Candyland,
Yeah.
thank God it was in a diabetes ward.
Nice. Nice.
The kid one of the two kids that's like kind of marching off down the lane, the path to Candyland, actually has braces on his legs.
No.
And so and she made this game to kind of amuse the little kids that
Right.
were in this ward, to kind of ease their suffering, I guess.
Wow.
And then eventually it ended up getting
Morphine
made
would
into
have been more helpful.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I can
candy
see.
is a good substitute.
Yeah,
got
I'm
polio.
not into sweet. I'm into savory. So
right, well.
was there like Meat Alley or
No potato chip game.
Pork
either.
Chop Hill?
Not
No.
till later on.
Sirloin Street.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, so are we?
But wait a minute, I'm still on Gina here.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you like Candyland?
I can't honestly.
You can't remember. You just remember.
I just remember it was one of the games. You
It
know.
was a game.
It was a game, and that's what we started with.
And half of those games too. The memory that I have of them are the boxes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The boxes, the game board, the
board.
and especially when you go from all the games that they would connect to popular TV shows or movies.
Oh, yeah.
It was always like it seemed like there were always like 4 templates of a game.
Yeah, and they just
would just
applied-
repurpose them.
Right.
But
Well, it's weird because I thought that as well. And then I started doing some research.
okay.
And I found that the games are very simple, but there are some games that really tried to do some unusual things back in the day.
Example.
So I had this idea that's like, oh, they just made the same board and they would put, Red Ryder or Batman or James Bond or whatever. And I found games that were doing, they're not really great mechanisms for play, but they were unusual in the sense that they started to bring in memory aspects, or they started bringing in negotiation aspects. And so one of them was kind of an early strategy, kind of area control. I think it was a Buck Rogers game or something. But originally I thought it was
the TV show?
Oh no, the comic strip.
Okay.
Yeah, the early licensing in board games has happened very early. Uncle Wiggly was the first licensed
The
character.
rabbit?
Yeah, the rabbit. Yeah.
What was
And
Uncle Wiggly from?
It's a rabbit.
It was like a children's book or
Okay,
something.
okay.
Yeah, and this was I want
Happy Little Rabbit.
I want to
Come
say
on.
this
Okay.
was from the 1920s or
Oh, wow,
30s.
okay.
And then of course you get Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and Lone Ranger and things and then of course the superheroes Superman and Batman and,
right.
and,
Right. Heard of them.
all the DC characters. And then eventually TV kicks in and,
Right.
and you get a lot of Gunsmoke and Get Smart and all these kind of
Get
things.
Smart should have had the doors, right?
They should have, but they didn't.
They didn't.
Now, were the main companies at that time Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers? I mean, were they the main ones?
Yeah, so Parker Brothers is pretty old. It goes back to the 1800s. And Parker, I'm trying to remember what his first game might have been. Was it the Checkered Game of Life? I think it might have
the
been
Game of Life?
Or Game of what we know as the Game of Life is actually very different than what the original game
Oh,
was.
okay.
The original game was a morality tale, and essentially it was you started life and you either ended up in poverty and essentially doomed, or you went to heaven.
Wow. Whoa, wait.
Wow.
You
Just like
you're in
real life.
poverty, or you die and go to heaven?
Yeah,
Was
pretty
that-
much. Yeah. Well, you live a good life, and then eventually the dying was subtext.
Oh, okay.
Right, right.
Because
but-
it's like I remember, life had the little cars and at the end you get in a car crash and you die.
That's
and
the
then-
'60s version.
Yeah,
That's a reinvention of the idea.
They had the
Right.
poorhouse, I know.
Yeah,
for
they
a
had the
while.
poorhouse,
You could go to
yeah,
the
I think-
poorhouse, which
yeah, you
that
go to
was
the
the one
poorhouse.
that always
I
confused
think you said
me.
whorehouse for a second.
Different game.
That should have been. It's an option. It's a life option. But the poorhouse, didn't they get rid of that? And was it the 60s or 70s
Yeah,
or something?
60s, all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Because what's the poorhouse?
well, that's
Now-
what we're all
that they-
living in now.
Well, I think it's called the street.
right. Well, yeah.
Yeah, right.
There aren't a lot of bum games out there. So.
Hobos.
Untapped market, I guess.
Panhandle. Bingo.
Yeah, so you're right, Parker Brothers, and then Milton Bradley. Milton Bradley is kind of a later company,
Right.
and for a long time, the people that were making the majority of the games that we know from that time period were actually large. They were almost like advertising agencies. Like, so imagine
Right.
Mad Men,
Right.
but with board games.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
most famous is a guy named Milton Glass, or is it Marvin Glass? I forget. One of the two. Anyway, he, out of essentially his game factory, came things like Operation,
okay.
and Mousetrap, and
Mousetrap.
all the kind of plastic toy types of
Right.
games from that 50s, 60s, 70s.
Right.
Yeah,
They were more
yeah.
physical games.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that was
Right.
a big since when plastic became a viable thing to make things out
Right.
of. Everybody was like, great, let's make all our games out of plastic and let's give them gimmicks, and because the audiences were traditionally children, they weren't trying to make anything of sophistication. They were just meant
Right.
to be
Colorful
Candyland.
and
Yeah, you play it. You when you're like 6 years old, you're like, I'm done with this. I'm now into bicycles or shooting cap guns or whatever,
Right.
making models, and board games are kind of left behind, right?
Yeah, but what's amazing about the two games that you mentioned, here we are in 2019,
still here.
Target still
Yep.
sells Mousetrap and Operation.
Yeah.
Well, it's an area of interest and frustration for modern board game designers, because a friend of mine once said that if you are selling a board game today, it's 2019, you are competing with every single other board game ever made, right?
Right.
Because board games don't
True.
get
Right.
most of them don't get torn up and thrown away, and that they're
Right.
they're still there. I'll bet if you went to your grandma's house, you could still find an old copy of Operation or Mousetrap.
Not
or
my
something like
grandma.
that. No, those of you with hipper grandparents.
So, like you said, like how they were made for kids, but then there was also that other level of games like Monopoly or Risk,
Right.
Which was more strategy. That was more for like young
more
adults.
adult. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Monopoly was once again kind of in the area of morality tale. It was invented by a woman named Elizabeth Maggie, and she did it. She made it in the, I want to say, once again, either the 1800s or the early 1900s. But essentially, her game was called the Landlord Game, and Maggie was she was an interesting lady. She thought that the idea of owning property was evil, and so she wanted to prove that property ownership, people became bad people because of property ownership. And so she made this board game, but the interesting thing about that time period was board games propagated like viruses. There was commercial printing of board games was a thing, and particularly like in Germany, it was already going on at this stage, but it really hadn't caught on huge in America yet. And so the way you would make a board game was I would come to your house with my copy of the Landlord Game, and you were like, oh man, this game is awesome. Can I borrow it and make my own copy? And so you would borrow my copy and you would draw your own board and you would make the pieces. But then as you're doing this, you might customize it, and you might say, Scott's copy of the Landlord Game has names of all the streets in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles, but I live here in Van Nuys. I'm going to make all the street names of Van Nuys. And so then you would
That's interesting.
make all your game board, and now you had your own personal copy of
Right.
the Landlord Game. Well, what happened was this game spread all over the country, and it was particularly popular in colleges. Like college kids were playing board games. It was a hot thing back
Right.
for like a hot second before drinking kicked back in. and so this I want to say they were like in Boston. They like they're like, this game isn't about land ownership. It's about making a monopoly because it's the 1920s and we all want to get rich and own property and be robber barons.
Slightly different message.
Yeah,
Okay.
they completely twisted the message
Wow,
around,
that's
and so they
interesting.
made their own version of the game. Now the funny thing is, this fellow named Charles Darrow, no relation to the other Charles Darrow, he's found the copy of Monopoly that these kids were making, and he said, I'll bet this is a really good game. I'll bet I could sell this to these guys, Parker Brothers. They're making games, and so he made his own version, and he changed it all to Atlantic City, and he came up with the things that essentially we associate with Monopoly today, and he sold it to Parker Brothers,
Wow.
and he made a good amount of money off of Elizabeth Maggie's game, and Parker Brothers for years had no clue that it had been ripped off. And then one day somehow they found out, and the best part of the story is Parker Brothers eventually bought up because people were making kind of like bootleg versions of Monopoly.
Okay.
So they like shut all those guys out of business. They like bought up all the rights, and they ended up paying until her death Elizabeth Maddie a royalty based on all the stuff that she had missed out on.
What?
Yeah, the Parker
never
brothers-
happens
It
now.
never happens nowadays. Yeah, but the Parker
pretty
brothers
awesome.
were good guys.
That's
Wow,
awesome.
that's great.
And to come full circle, now you've got all these different versions of Monopoly for all these different
Right.
licenses.
Well, there's a whole
Sure.
other company that makes that. There's Hasbro who owns the rights now because it's been bought and rebought and rebought. The companies have gone. Now there's a whole splinter company called USAopoly, and they have the license to make every version of Monopoly other than the kind of the finger quote official version of Monopoly.
Right, and they have that like for Clue.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
Too.
they-
Have different versions.
Yeah, the Game of Thrones Monopoly and
Yeah,
Rick and
yeah.
Morty Monopoly and
Star Wars
Monopoly.
Yeah.
There's a
and-
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer Monopoly.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
crazy.
I hate to be a fly in the ointment here, but no matter how you brand that game, it's not a good time. It's
Well,
just,
I've never finished. A game.
no one has.
I think I have either, to
Only
be
the
honest.
drunk college kids, and I don't think they remember not finishing it.
All right,
Right,
here's
right.
here's where I become the snotty game.
All right, here we go,
expert.
here we go.
And that is because you're probably playing it wrong.
Oh, so it's my fault.
Well,
okay, all right.
So there's two rules that most Monopoly players overlook.
Okay.
The first is you should never, ever, ever get the money back that's put in the middle of the board, because that just extends the length of the game. The goal of the game is to drive people to bankruptcy and only have one person left with a monopoly.
well,
So-
making it shorter, if that's one of the things,
if
then that's good.
If
Yeah.
you play Monopoly by the official rules, it takes 45 minutes to play.
oh, I like
really?
this.
And
This
then
is getting better.
Then the other rule is if you land on a property and you cannot afford to buy it, you have to auction it off. And so when you auction it off, it gets into the stream of the other players quickly. And so rather than going around and around and around and, oh, we didn't land on Marvin Gardens, and so therefore it's nobody's bought it yet. No, it's you end up eventually very quickly getting the property out to everybody. And then, of course, once the property gets to everybody, they can start building on it. And once they start building on it, then you start pulling money from everybody else. And so by the end of it, it just speeds up the finances very quickly.
Again, your answer to making the game more fun was to make it shorter.
Right. Yeah, well, yeah. Because
So-
everybody's complaint is that it takes forever.
It does, but even at 45 minutes, isn't that a long 45 minutes?
Well, that's
whereas again, Mousetrap or
well, but
Operation.
Mousetrap isn't a fun game. A Mousetrap is fun to build, but,
But
have
actually,
you
it's
played the
frustrating
game?
to build though because you can never get it right.
Right,
It
right,
works
It is
right.
really just waiting for the thing to
Right,
be
yeah.
built.
You just do
that's
it
true.
once, and
That's
then
true.
everybody says, "All right,
but
we're
what
done
if
with
But that's why I feel like we should mix games. Like,
Oh, that's right.
Monopoly should be also Mousetrap. Like, like as you're acquiring these properties,
Right.
you have to build the properties. But because
I'm writing
you're,
this down in my notebook.
because you don't want to use the proper building materials, you go on the
So you want to play irresponsible builder Monopoly.
and then so
All
you
right.
build this thing, and then it all crumbles, and you get penalized for that. Hopefully,
And then you become hobo Monopoly.
yeah. See,
Yeah.
that's a good game.
All right, I'll make a note of it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's nobody is going to argue that Monopoly isn't the best game. I mean, there are people that compete. They have like tournaments.
love it.
And
Yeah.
they love
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
and you'll find this for a lot of the classic games, things like Boggle and Scrabble, and I mean, there's no Mousetrap tournaments, sadly, but there could be, sure.
I always thought you should bring all those games to Vegas. Like, imagine if there was like a high stakes Hungry Hippos.
Oh, I'm sure there has been.
I
There
think
has
that's
to have
that's a
been.
great idea.
Right,
But now
yeah.
it wasn't like the, I guess, 50s through the 70s, maybe kind of a high point for popularity in board games.
Maybe in popularity, but definitely not in quality.
Right.
Although that's when I grew up. I mean, that's when I first encountered board games. So,
Right.
so you said your first was Candyland.
Yeah.
My first was a game called Green Ghost. Do you guys remember?
Oh my God.
I know of that game.
I wanted that game
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
badly.
Yeah, Green Ghost was this great game. Essentially, it was a gamification of the Halloween gag of putting your hand into a bag of grapes and saying these are witches' eyes, or essentially it was feathers, and they're supposed to be bats, and there were other things that were supposed to be spiders.
You'd
And
fall into holes.
well,
and things,
there were
right?
holes that you put your hand in. They had hatches. But the best part about it, in the version that I played, I think it's from like 1972, it really glowed in the dark.
Yeah.
Like
You
was
played it in
super
You had to
dark.
play it.
Was,
Yeah.
was it the first game that glowed in the dark?
It might have been. Yeah, it was
That's
72,
cool.
right? Or was it earlier?
It says 1965.
Oh, 65. Okay. Yeah. So they've made some other modern versions of it, but the plastic was. I think there's probably some sort of law about the phosphorescence you can use nowadays.
Yeah.
It doesn't glow as
Well, it probably
Good.
doesn't poison children now.
You
or
walk
something.
away from it.
yeah.
So-
See,
How does
what-
it glow?
You
It
walk
doesn't
away
glow
from
as
the
well.
game glowing.
Well, see, what I remember when I played it at a friend's house, we had to, it's nighttime, and to make the ghost glow, it's like we took a light with a light bulb and
Right.
put it right on the ghost
Yeah,
for like
yeah.
5
and
minutes.
those suckers would glow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the problem was, so we're playing with it in the dark, and all of a sudden I started to feel really nauseous and sick. I
You shouldn't have been licking the ghost.
Yes, that was my problem, Scott. I was licking the ghost.
Is that code of some sort? Don't lick the ghost, Larry.
There was one that I always saw photos of. I never played, but I always wanted to, and that was one called Haunted House.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Haunted
that
House,
looked really
ideal
cool.
game. It had little like hatches that you would open up, and you're looking for. Oh, there's a skeleton, there's a bat, and things like that.
That
Yeah,
looked really cool.
that's actually.
Electronic, right?
No. It was once again analog. It kind of predates the kind of. Well, actually, there might have been a sound in it, right? Does it make noise when you open the door?
I think there was. Yeah, I think there was some noises.
Yeah. That is. Oh no, that's a different haunted
that's a
house.
different one. Yeah,
Yeah.
That-
Oh, we'll talk about that
That's
one. In
Witch
a second.
Witch,
Yeah,
right?
that's Witch, and also the new Ghostbusters game.
That's
from
right,
The
yes.
80s.
Yeah.
Oh,
They
wow,
reskinned.
okay.
They reskinned that one several
Yeah.
times. The haunted house that you're talking about is. So I'm actually later this year. I'm doing a talk on the history of horror in board games
nice.
at a great event that's called the Tabletop Network Conference. It's in the fall. And historically, as far as I can tell, that haunted house game is the first horror themed board game.
Oh wow. Cool.
Yeah. And this is, of course, like early 60s, right? So 62, I think.
Yeah.
And, as you guys know, because you're all horror aficionados, this is like when the big boom of,
Shock theater
Yeah,
was on
Shock
local
theater
TV.
and Ghoulardi and
Right.
Dracula and Frankenstein was being aired constantly. And so, of course, all the kids are like, oh, we want monsters. And so
Right.
the board game companies, always eager to take advantage of children, they made a lot of monster games during this
Yeah,
time
God
they
period.
bless
made,
'em.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the Frankenstein mystery game.
Yep.
They also made Dracula,
Yep.
Wolfman, the Mummy,
Yeah,
Phantom
whole
of the Opera.
series.
Yeah, and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, but to me, there is a flaw in the design of these games,
they're all
and
the
I have
same
an
game.
issue. Well, but see, here's as a creature. Hello. I'm talking as
Hello.
a creature fan. I know that Creature from the Black Lagoon game is desired
Yeah,
by
it's the
creature-
rarest of the
yeah
of all of them.
of all the creature items. But the truth is, the actual game and the actual board and the
sucks.
actual the box. It's really not that dynamic. They use the picture made by James Bama of the Creature from the Black Lagoon from the Aurora model kit, and there's basically an image of him on the board in a very simple.
Yeah, it's huge. It's the one. It's like just one image on the
Yeah,
board.
and the funny thing is, a lot of these, with the exception of the Frankenstein mystery game, the others, the Dracula and the Mummy, they all follow the same kind of pattern.
Right.
And yeah, they're rare games. They're hard to find, and find one in great shape. They cost a lot of money. But as a creature fan, and I know Bobby Slayton had one. For and it sold for a ton of money. I actually don't have any desire for it because it just the design of it is just not that great. And then later on, Ideal did a Godzilla game and a King Kong game, and again, same kind of principle
Same
where
game.
they kind of had an interesting picture on the box,
Right.
but when you open it up with the board, there's maybe 5 pictures of Godzilla with a simple little path. And also, let's face it. When you're a kid, you want to play this game. Don't you want a little Godzilla figure to move around the board?
I want it to be underwater.
Three-dimensional.
No, yeah, but look, I don't even need it 3-dimensional. Matt, just give me a little Godzilla figure
All right,
to
so-
move. No, just hold on, Scott, hold on. No, so instead, it's
Welcome to Monster Party.
Instead, it's like a little pebble
man,
or a
ready
little
for this.
wooden square or a
Yeah.
little ball, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I don't want to move this stupid little thing. Or it's a rocket and it's shaped like a triangle. Woo! No, I want a figure of a monster.
So if it makes you feel better,
No, I'm not. No.
there is
it
a
won't.
game coming out this fall, and I believe it's called Horrified. and it is a Universal licensed horror game where you are playing angry villagers, and one of, I want to say 6 or 7 of the Universal monsters are, like, one of them is the monster behind like all the horror that's going on, and you have to kind of track them down. And so there's there's a Dracula, a Frankenstein, a werewolf, the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Invisible Man, and one other
Mummy?
Maybe the yeah. I think
How do
the
they get
Mummy.
around the time difference, though?
They
'Cause
don't. They just
it's screw it, right?
It's essentially they're like, all right, now we're playing the Mummy scenario. Okay, now we're playing the dragon. It's
Okay.
essentially
Right.
it's 7 or 6 or 7 stories in one box.
I
So
wanna-
will get your supposedly get your miniature little creature of the Black Lagoons. in
Yeah,
that.
I want to play that weird woman who's in the Frankenstein movie and the Invisible Man. You know what I'm talking?
Una O'Connor.
Yeah.
I will say this:
That's the figure I
we
want.
mentioned Frankenstein. Now, the board game of the Frankenstein, the Mystery Frankenstein game, it did have little paper cutouts and it did have pictures of different monsters. But I wasn't much into the board game as I wanted a physical game.
Right.
There was a big, thick game that you could play with that was a Frankenstein game, and that was the pop-up Frankenstein action game. And imagine, if you will, for listeners, it was like nearly 2 feet tall, a giant yellow castle. And at the top was a little plastic Frankenstein figure. And what you had to do is each person got a turn to stick a dagger into the castle to try to climb up the castle. When you got up to the top and you press the little button, Frankenstein would pop out.
It's like a reverse kerplunk.
Yes, exactly.
I don't think I've ever heard of this game.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
The thing
my
is,
God. When did that come out?
This is like 1964, 63, 64. But in my family, because
Do you have that?
no, I had something else, and that was the Jack and the
Polly
Beans.
Pocket
No,
and
no,
her hideous Halloween
no.
adventure.
This was actually a really cool game. Bear
Okay.
with me. It was called the Jack and the Beanstalk game from 1965. Now I was
Okay.
born in 64. Hey, no, don't knock it, because it was like a giant beanstalk, which was
that's
2
cool.
feet tall.
I like that.
And it was thick plastic, Matt. Thick.
I like that.
And what was cool
Okay.
is at the top of the beanstalk was a giant cloud and a castle.
Oh, that's neat.
And what you did
Do you
is
have that still?
I have remnants of it. Okay?
He has one of the swords.
1965. No. So what
I
you
turned
did-
mine into a bomb,
Hello.
so-
So the problem is you couldn't play it with 4 people. It could only be 2, really. And so there's like a little slot at the bottom, and you would push the slot backwards and forwards. And each time you pulled out the slot, a different leaf would come out, and you had to put the leaf into this beanstalk, and the leaf had a stem that was either a triangle or a circle or a square, and if you couldn't put it in that bottom one working your way up, then you had to put it back into the beanstalk, and then the next person would go, when you get up to the top and you press the little button, you get to the top, then the giant's head pops up and goes, ah! Well, it doesn't go, ah, but it pops up. And it's
you
really
provide
good.
that sound.
Exactly. And I love
That
this
sounds
game.
great.
Now, the funny thing is, it's not as desirable as the Frankenstein game.
No,
All
I like
monster
that.
fans want the Frankenstein one, but, you could actually find the Jack and the Beanstalk.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's cool.
there's a lot of that shock in. I mean, this is once, like I said, I'm doing this talk, and so I kind of identify what are the different gameplay elements, and shock is a big part of kids' games. You
Right,
get things
right.
like Operation, right? You hit the guy,
Sure.
his nose goes off. There's more modern games like Don't Wake Daddy, which is a
Right,
game
right.
where
I
the
love that
plastic
one.
daddy kind of rises up. And
What was the
Daddy
one
is
where you
gonna
break the
smack you.
back of a camel? You know that one?
no, I'm
you
not
put a bunch of
familiar
shit
with
in
that
the channel. Yeah, there's
Remember
like a
that?
camel that has like
Camel's
saddlebags.
back or something.
Oh,
Yeah.
You put a bunch
yeah,
of shit.
Bucky. I mean, there's a donkey one.
There's
that
a
does
dog.
that.
Yeah, it's always like kill the animal. Woohoo, I won. Yeah.
Exactly, murder the poodle game. But I mean that idea of, and we still get it today. Games like what is it? Aggravation is the one where you put the pieces in and it has the timer.
Oh, yes,
And if you don't
yes.
get it in time,
The
everything
spring,
kind
right?
of shoots
The-
out.
Perfection.
Perfection. Thank you. Yeah. Perfection. So games like that, it's a lot of the kids' games have this, right? It's this
Right.
because like little kids love the shock.
Yeah,
they
the
love
surprise
and
and
big
shock.
kids.
surprise.
Talking about some of those vintage board games, it's interesting now that after all this time, they are maybe sought after by collectors. It doesn't have anything to do with the playability.
Right.
It has to do with the aesthetics.
Yeah.
What is the box? What does the board look like?
Yeah, the
What do
artwork.
the pieces
Right,
look
right.
like? And I've done that myself. I've gone on eBay looking for different types of board games based on I don't care whether or not they're that complete or in great condition, but it's a cool board.
Right.
It's a cool box.
Yeah.
I-
It hasn't
I
like,
see you're looking at my own opinion of the granddaddy of that philosophy, which is the Riverside Haunted Mansion
Oh
game.
my God.
Which I owned as a child because I'm a huge Haunted Mansion
Wait,
fan.
so what is
too.
this again? It's the Riverside.
Riverside is the name of the company.
Okay.
And
Like
it's
Disney
the Disney Haunted
Haunted
Mansion. And the packaging infers that it's Walt Disney World, but it's really the Anaheim Mansion. And it has this absolutely gorgeous backboard that serves almost no purpose to the gameplay other than just looks gorgeous.
Looks wonderful.
It's beautiful. It looks
It's really tall.
Yeah, it's very tall. It's if you guys know the LP, the Haunted Mansion LP,
Yes.
it's
Yeah,
very,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
very
That
similar
cover.
to the Colin
Yeah,
Campbell
that's
art that's
awesome.
on that.
Nice.
And it comes with these really adorable little Doom Buggy tokens that you spin around. There's kind of these spinners that you kind of change the direction of the path, so kind of emulating the
Cool.
movement of the Doom Buggies. Like I said, I owned it as a kid. I played it to tatters. I got rid of it. And then probably about 10, 15 years later, when I discovered eBay, I'm like,
God help
oh my
you.
God, I got to get this back again, right? And so I actually found one. I found one in perfect condition,
How much?
$60.
Oh.
And then it got lost in the mail.
it got lost in the mail.
Yeah, I
Maybe
don't know.
somebody-
Yeah. So I got my money back. So, and then I bought another one that's in not as good condition, but still playable and all that. And I think I paid maybe 120 for that.
That's
or
not
something,
bad.
which is not bad. Yeah. But yeah, it is. Like I
Beautiful.
said, besides the fact that I love Haunted Mansion, yeah, it is a gorgeous game, but it is a lousy game. It is just
Is
not.
it?
It's not that good. It's an interesting mechanism. The idea of doing these they're like gears. There's like these 3 big gears, and then you put these like cardboard versions of like the hitchhiking ghosts and the ballroom ghosts and characters like that. And so they kind of as you crank kind of a knob, they spin around and they can whack the Doom Buggy off the path, and you have to reset it or you put. But there's a lot of
Crank, knob, and whack.
Right.
Now, this game is hitting us on a lot of levels that maybe we weren't aware of.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a lot more fun like Monopoly than you give it
no,
credit
it's
for.
not, because I've played it relatively recently, and the biggest problem with it is it has a lot of lose a turn, which to modern game designers, that's kind of a verboten topic, right? So we just it's a lot of you move down it, roll and move, and that's the thing is that the thing about these older games, they're gorgeous, they're great collector's items, but the industry has moved on, and
Right.
so roll and move is not no longer a desirable mechanic. Losing a turn is no longer a desirable mechanic. Having no choice, like Candyland, you draw a card. It says go to purple. You go to purple. It's the game to teach you to be obedient. And
The
so
Nazi Germany game.
right, well,
Wait.
there's a little more
Hey.
choice in Nazi Germany.
Keep it light, I know.
Anyway, the point is that these games, while gorgeous and nostalgic, they're
more art pieces.
Yeah. When you play them nowadays, you're going to find them kind of lacking.
Right.
Gina,
Yes.
so some of your favorite games from the I guess it would be the golden age of 50s, 60s, 70s, that golden age of beautiful games. What were the ones that you played with that you liked, that you thought were lovely?
I love Trouble because I like that Pop-O-Matic.
Pop-O-Matic,
thing.
yeah.
I love
Yeah,
that.
everybody likes that.
You know what's funny? Isn't it like doing that Pop-O-Matic? Doesn't it just kind of calm you?
It does. It does.
You
don't
just
need
be
a
able to
stress
carry it
ball. You
around.
could-
Yeah.
Pop that.
Love that thing.
Yeah, I love that. I loved Clue.
Oh yeah,
Oh,
Clue
yeah.
is great.
Yeah.
You liked Clue?
Yeah.
I kind of like Clue.
Clue still holds. It's one of the few that still holds up.
It's a little more fun
If
than
you,
Monopoly.
once again, like Monopoly, if you ignore the moving around the mansion,
Yeah.
if you just kind of go from room to room, it's a much more fun
Yeah,
game.
you got to figure out who did what.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
I
It's
like
too-
just
too go-
I just like roll the dice and move.
but get rid of the
Kerplunk.
So you don't like to think when you play.
Kerplunk. That's where I'm at. You know what I mean? You know what I used to really love was pickup sticks. It's a very
yeah, yeah,
simple
me too,
game,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
but at least it seemed like there was a little bit of strategy of like trying to.
Dexterity, yeah.
Yeah,
It was like Barrel Full of Monkeys. Remember that?
Yeah.
That was
I
kinda
enjoy
fun.
that.
But that's
Yeah.
less of a game
Yeah.
and more of an activity, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just exercising your motor skills.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that shouldn't even be in this topic.
Well,
don't-
a barrel of monkeys, that's fantasy, right?
don't break the ice.
Oh,
that,
yeah,
that was
yeah.
similar
I
to
love
pick
those.
up sticks in a
Yeah.
way, right?
Yeah.
I like that one.
Remember the
Yeah.
Jaws game?
Oh yeah, where you put the little fishing hook in his mouth and try and pull out a tire or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. There's a couple of variations of that. If you look up the history of the Jaws game, it's actually been reskinned a couple of times. Like first it was a Jaws game, then they lost the license, and they were like, well, we still have the molds. We
It's
ought to
the
make
Great
something.
White Shark
Yeah,
game.
Great White Shark game. Yeah, exactly. And then I think it became like Snappy Sam or something like that. Like it had some sort of cutesy name in the 90s.
Then the Trump game where you remove feet from his mouth. Oh, comedy right from the front page.
Well, you know, it's funny. In the 70s, wasn't this the time also where you had like motion pictures would come out and it's like, oh my gosh, let's. Well, sort of within the genre,
Right,
you know,
let's make
science
the
fiction,
Star Wars
fantasy.
game.
Talking.
Let's make the Buck Rogers
Exactly,
game.
exactly.
Yeah, we have the Buck Rogers one, the Planet of the Apes game.
Planet of the Apes.
I mean,
I played that once.
yeah.
Was that
Yeah.
was that a good one? The Planet
I
of the
was.
Apes? What were the?
I
Little,
was stoned at the time, so yes. it was.
so what were the figures? Did they make little apes, or were they?
No,
they're just
they're
cardboard.
cardboard.
Yeah. They were what they're called standees, the cardboard
Right,
figures,
yes,
right?
yes.
Yeah,
And
They're humans, right? They were all human figures.
yeah, usually. So there's a podcast, some friends of mine that they do, and they talk about board games, and they have called something the Optimus Prime Conundrum, which is they were playing a Transformers game, and they were like, oh great, we get to all play as Transformers. I can't wait to be Prowl. I can't wait to be Bumblebee, whatever. And they open it up, and it was 4 Optimus Primes, and it was like the yellow Optimus Prime, and the green Optimus Prime, and the blue Optimus Prime, and the red Optimus Prime, and they're like, this is the stupidest thing ever, right? So they kind of dubbed this idea that where everybody is playing. So for example, if you play like an Indiana Jones game, everybody is Indiana Jones. Well, of course, we all know that there's only one Indiana Jones. And so then that creates a bit of a conundrum of like, how can 4 Indiana Joneses simultaneously exist at the same time? Wouldn't it cause some sort of horrible
Alternate
paradox or
universes?
something? Yeah.
Pocket
But
universes?
the game is not about that. It's about being Indiana Jones.
If you
right?
smoke enough pot, it is.
Well, that's true.
Into the Indiana verse.
Yes. There we go. That's
But
the next.
what I liked about the Planet of the Apes game, though, is that you could kind of argue that you're just a random human.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
trying to just outwit,
Yeah,
outrun the apes.
Yeah, not
It's
be
Survivor.
lobotomized.
It's a survival thing, yeah.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so what would happen is if you came out on the wrong end of the game, you would wind up at the top of this big cage that was in the middle, and then you would fall in the cage. And there was even a little mechanism that you could press where
Right.
you'd fall
Yeah,
in.
it was a little a mouse trap.
And that was fun,
Right.
you
Sure,
know.
yeah.
But as you've pointed out with these other games, the gameplay itself is kind of like, yeah. When are we going to get to the cage so we can fall in it?
Right. So
Right.
so during the mid '80s or so, when I was I'm kind of primed to do this for a living because much like Gina here has been playing games for her whole life. I have as well, right? And I grew up
Mind
with,
games.
well, yeah, not just mind games, but when I was in high school, I worked in a board game store. It was like a place called the Gamekeeper, and it was we sold like high-end chess sets, like gold chess sets and
Yes.
ivory.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
But the other half of the store were traditional board games. And my boss at the time said, "All right, I want you to take home a game every night and learn how to play it because you need to know how to sell it." So essentially, I learned how to play every
Wow.
board game in existence.
became
in
the game master.
I was the game master, yeah.
Wow.
And at this time, there were 2 major things that happened in the board gaming world. The first was Milton Bradley released a series of games that they called the Game Masters series. And this is where games like Axis and Allies and Fortress America and Broadsides and Boarding Parties and Shogun and I think there's something about Rome, like something about the Empire of Rome. So these were like really huge, high-end board games with tons of plastic pieces. Broadsides and Boarding Parties actually came with like 1.5 foot long pirate ships that had little miniatures on them.
All right.
Yeah, I
Wow.
looked that one up. It's really cool. And then the other thing that happened was because this is kind of as D&D is kicking in, and so
Right,
D&D has been
right.
around since the early 70s, 73 or so, and that had a profound influence on the gaming world, video games as well as board games. And the company out of England called Games Workshop, they were starting to put out board games as well. So this is where Space Hulk and Chainsaw Warrior and Warhammer, essentially the things that became Warhammer Universe. If you guys, these are all miniatures games now, but
Right.
but the
I'll take your
early,
word for
but
it.
they're all board. And then they also had some licensed things like Dungeon Quest, which was originally a Swedish game, and then they did a game called Talisman. And to me, as this teenager working in these stores, they looked nothing like any of the games I'd grown up with. They had like weird, freaky, monsterish art, or they were super high quality. The Game Master stuff was like all high quality production production, plastics, and all that. And
Really
and,
expensive?
Yeah, they were, because I always lusted after a few of them and never could afford it at the time.
Right.
But expensive in those days was like $80.
Yeah,
which
that's high.
That's really high for 1985, right?
Sure, sure.
So I tended to gravitate towards some of the inexpensive ones, like Talisman, I think was like $30, and Space Hulk was a little bit more. But these were, for my opinion, these were like kind of big bombshells in the board gaming
They're like
world.
game changers.
Yeah, they literally were game changers.
Nice one, Sheridan.
But like,
Put your name on the board.
When did Dungeons and Dragons hit? When
Well,
was that?
it was created in 73, and it really started to kick in around 76, 77, somewhere around there. As a matter of fact, the interesting thing about, even though it was invented in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, LA actually has a really good history with Dungeons and Dragons. So if you go to Santa Monica, there's a store called Aero Hobbies. And Aero Hobbies was, LA, of course, has a big, deep nerd culture because of all the sci-fi writers and guys like Bradbury and Harris.
Harlan Ellison.
All those guys, right? But there was also a big board gaming community, partially because of them and partially because of the Army and Marines and Navy guys in San Diego, because they were always bored and they wanted things to do. And the first LA group to play D&D played out of Aero Hobbies, and they invented two really important things. They invented the Thief class for D&D, which was not in the game when it first came out, and they also invented the idea of the critical hit, where if you roll a 20-sided die and you get a 20, you do double damage or automatically win or whatever. Right? So LA is just as responsible for some big innovations in D&D as Wisconsin is.
So let me ask you, were there other games that were like
No,
that were
not at
competing?
all.
So this was the one that changed it.
D&D is like jazz to music.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
It is a wholly American invention. It comes from a tradition of three different games. It comes from the idea of Kriegspiel, which is a Prussian miniatures war game that was used actually for military simulation. And this is, you see those pictures of World War.
Moving little things.
Yeah,
on the
moving
map.
the little
Yeah.
miniatures, right? So that goes all the way back to like the 1700s or so. And guys like H.G. Wells used to play it, and he wrote like the first rule book on Kriegspiel called Little Wars. And then the second tradition, of course, is these thematic board games, right? So this idea of, like the fantasy elements of this. So Gygax they were getting bored with like the Napoleonic, because a lot of the Kriegspiel was Napoleonic or Civil War, things
Take
like
over
that.
this land.
Yeah, simulating real battles. And so Gygax was like, hey, let's play knights. And so they started playing knights, and then Gygax goes, well, if there's knights, there's got to be dragons, right? And if there's dragons, there's got to be wizards, and if there's wizards, there's got to be magic.
Nice.
And so
Right.
the evolution of his wargaming changed into this fantasy setting.
Right.
And in his Dave Arneson, who was like one of his gaming buddies, he had built like a whole castle for them to siege, his players to siege. And instead of like directly attacking the castle, they found a secret route into the dungeon of the castle, but they spent the entire game playing in the dungeon. They were having so much fun killing guards in the dungeon that they're like, we want to keep doing this. Forget the castle. Let's just play in the dungeons. And so Arneson and Gygax kind of put their heads together and went, let's make a game about playing, wizards and knights against dragons.
It's like strategy in a fantasy magic world.
Yeah. So it started as this miniature strategy game, but it eventually, but the thing, the secret sauce of the game was, as people were playing, Gygax and Arneson were such good storytellers that they literally had game groups every night. Like every night they were running games of Dungeons and Dragons, even before it was Dungeons and Dragons, because people are like, we love the stories. And the major innovation of Dungeons and Dragons was the game changed from the game being about you playing, the Lone Ranger or Batman or Uncle Wiggily or whatever, to the story being about you. So now the adventure is about, I am the hero, I am the fighter, I am the wizard, I am the cleric, I'm doing the action, and I am affecting the game. And the storytelling element overtook the game, and they said, well, let's just pump this up. Let's make this more about storytelling. And they still had a lot of dice rolls and a lot of charts and things like that.
But you're right, the storytelling element became such a big part of it.
And that was the huge innovation, because no other game had done that before.
Right.
How does the Dungeon Master, how does that come in? Because, now I'm not...
Gygax and Arneson. They were the original Dungeon Masters.
So, as someone who doesn't really play Dungeons and Dragons,
You're missing out.
I know, and I've had so many people tell me I should, and it goes to a deeper problem, the problem I have with playing games. But we'll get to that later. But when it,
I told you not to lick the pieces.
you don't want to know where the pieces are. Now, the dungeon master is, you're talking about the game is about you.
Right.
The dungeon master
Is God.
Is God. So he's sort of helping you create
Kinda.
your adventure.
It depends.
Guiding you.
How does that work?
It depends on the dungeon master. So you can either be a
depends
kind
on the
god,
whim of the
well,
god, right?
That's part of it. You can be a kind god, or you can be
No
a
such
cruel
thing.
god. So for example, a great story is my personal favorite dungeon from the old D&D days is a place called the Tomb of Horrors, and it's a nefarious dungeon that is unusually hard. And the story behind the Tomb of Horrors is that Gygax and his kids, his oldest son is named Ernie. Ernie and all his buddies were like his first test audience. So they were playing D&D and they were leveling up, and they were, becoming very powerful characters. And in old D&D, if you hit like 12th level, you were like a god. You could pretty much destroy anything. And Ernie and all his buddies were bragging about how great they were and how nothing could defeat them and how they would always win. And so Gary Gygax says, all right, you little punks, I'm going to make a dungeon that is going to kill every single one of you. And so he creates this infamous Tomb of Horrors, which literally is the first game that just trolls the players. Like as they, the perfect, my favorite thing in the Tomb of Horrors is there's a large green devil face, like a sculpture on a wall, but it has a black mouth, like a pitch black mouth. And so you're sitting there and they're saying, all right, you see this devil on the wall and there's a pitch black mouth. What do you do? And of course, like, what would you guys do if you're in this scenario? Say you're
Run?
Well, no, it's not a real devil.
What's the amount of dice to run?
You don't need to roll dice to run.
So you would look into the mouth for like some treasure or something?
Yeah, what would you do?
Like,
Tell me what you would do.
I don't
See,
know.
we're terrible at these
I'd look
things.
inside.
That's why we don't play games. We have no idea what we're doing.
So if you peered into it, I'd say, well, it's very dark in there.
So you get a light,
Get a light.
candle.
You still can't see. It's just very dark.
Okay.
So what would you do? I mean, there might be treasure in there.
I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I'd probably call someone.
Well, you're in a dungeon, so there's no telephone.
There's no
Light a
service.
torch.
Yeah, light a torch and what? Would maybe like stick it in there or something?
Yes.
Or, like you put your arm in?
Yes.
All right, you put your arm in. You pull your arm back out.
Yes.
There's no arm.
Okay. Well, it teaches you not to do that again.
You just lost your arm. Take 50 points in damage.
Well, there
right?
you go.
Right? Or if you put your head in, guess what doesn't come out? Or if you decide to crawl in, because the mouth is a sphere of annihilation, which is a thing that once you go into it, you are utterly destroyed. So
who puts their head in first?
Well, Ernie and his friends did, because Gary had a good laugh and
they didn't
murder,
know.
and they didn't know, right? And the entire dungeon is filled with horrible things like this, right?
Wow.
So at the end, Gary Gygax murdered the entire group. Like none of them survived, and then he made it a tournament module. Essentially, they would do this big show in originally it was in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, called Gen Con. It's a huge board gaming conference.
Yes, we've heard about
Yeah,
Jackie
it's
from
fantastic.
Jackie Cation.
Jackie Cation,
yeah.
yeah.
Dark
Right.
Forest has talked about this.
Yeah, Jackie is a huge role player. She plays all the time. Her husband Andy is a very good friend of mine. We
love
play
Andy.
games a lot. Yeah, who doesn't love Andy? And anyway, so they ran it as like this tournament game, and then eventually, when they were making commercial modules, these things that you would use, essentially they were pre-written adventures, but you could write up your own. That was like a really popular one because it was so murderous and horrible and all that. But the other great thing about D&D is this idea that you can make up your own stuff. You don't have to stick to the Tomb of Horrors or anything else.
Right.
And for myself, that's where I got my start as a game designer, because I was
Okay.
an 8-year-old kid who stumbled onto a tent full of Boy Scouts who were playing D&D, and I was like, hey, what's going on here? And they said, leave us alone, we're busy playing this game. And I picked up this book that's called The Monster Manual, and I started thumbing through it. And in it, I saw all these characters that I recognized from Ray Harryhausen movies. So Medusas and Minotaurs and other things, dragons. And I go, hey, you really should have me play with you, because I know how to defeat all these monsters. I know the weaknesses of every single one of these monsters because I've read Greek mythology and I've watched all these Harryhausen movies. And so they let me play. And then I went, oh my God, I got to get these books for myself. And I got them for my birthday. And I pulled all my buddies in and I started writing my own adventures. And that's how I got my start in game design.
Even though I didn't get into Dungeons and Dragons, I do remember friends who played it, and I do remember seeing those manuals with all the
Yeah, they're really
monster
cool.
books, and that was really
The
cool.
manuals I loved, I think, more. It's always, that's my thing with games. Dungeons and Dragons or like Cthulhu Wars, you know, because I love all that kind of stuff. And it's like I go back to being a little kid again, where I love the pieces more than everything else, and then I get to playing the game, and it's like. And it's a matter of patience.
Right.
It's being able to go stick with it.
A friend of mine who's a game designer, he says the best thing about a board game is when you first open it. And the worst part about a board game is when you have to read the rules, which ironically happens right after you open the box, right?
Speaking like a different kind of game, because like you're saying, D&D can happen in the mid 70s.
Right.
As I was growing up, as it was coming into like the late 70s and just as the 80s were hitting, what I was really into was pinball.
Oh, yeah.
But pinball machines seemed to really go to a next level too, like around the late 70s, because there were games that were just, I mean, there were licenses of popular movies and shows, but like I really got into pinball like in the mid to late 70s.
Right. Well, that was the innovation of the digital
once
displays,
the digital,
right?
once the digital displays, because there are certain games. I mean, there was a game. There's a pinball machine called Space Invaders.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Matter of fact, I was just watching a movie that. Oh, in Captain Marvel, there's a copy of Space Invaders.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And was the pinball game before the video game?
No, this was a pinball machine called Space Invaders, and
separate from
really
the
it
video
was
game.
Alien.
Oh,
It was the Alien, and
Right.
it was all the
Yeah.
Giger-esque designs, but it wasn't. They couldn't call
vaguely
it.
remember
And
that.
it was
that,
a
Sean.
great game. It was one of my favorite games, and there was lots of games that pinball's machines just tried different things. There was a Superman pinball machine that was giant.
Yep.
It was like big. You had put your and it had big flippers, and it was awesome. There was a later, I think in like late 80s, the first, I think, Star Trek: The Next Generation game.
That was a good one.
I think that was the first one where I discovered like multi-ball.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of like once you hit a certain thing, several of the balls come down. It's chaos and it's awesome.
Yeah. The Elvira one is fantastic.
Elvira, which is called Elvira and the Party Monsters.
Yeah. Well, that's one of them. There's
That was a
another
great
one that
one.
has. I'm blanking on what the name of it is.
You're right, there's a couple of viral
Yeah.
ones. Yeah.
There was one that had like a big crate that you would kind of knock on.
Yes.
It had a monster.
Yeah.
It would shake and rattle.
Gina, one of our favorites was Attack from Mars.
Yeah,
Remember that
yeah.
one?
Attack from Mars is
Attack from
awesome.
Mars had little like rubbery kind of green Martians, all like positioned inside the game board that you're playing. And at a certain point, I think maybe when you got multi-ball or something, they would all like shake and rattle.
Yeah, the whole thing rattled.
It was so great. So I mean, Flash Gordon, based on the movie, there was a great game. The Black Knight,
Yep. Black Knight's
Playboy.
great. Yep.
Playboy was a great one. It had Hugh Hefner.
Speaking
with
of multi-balls.
two playmates. One of my favorite ones was the first talking pinball machine, which is called Gorgar.
Oh, Gorgar
He
is
kind of
good.
talked to you as you got.
Do you remember Funhouse that would talk to you
Yes,
as well? With
yes.
the ventriloquist dummy? had?
Yes.
Yeah, like so that, and they had like different levels. I mean, they
Yeah,
got
yeah.
so cool as just. It
but
was like
pinball.
And of course, that's in response to video games, though, right? Because of the
Right, because that
popularity
was
of video
just
games.
coming in.
and they
Yeah.
they had to compete, and so
Right,
they're like,
right.
we got to up our game. So fortunately, they were using a lot of the same technology and ideas.
Yeah, they got really
and evolved.
sophisticated.
I
And
mean,
like you're saying, Matt, like you get patience and like not have. Pinball is so kinetic
It's
and
fast
so
moving. Yeah,
like,
that
that's-
was one
and
that I
still
could
love it.
I still do enjoy those. I get to a point even with pinball where I go,
Really?
I stopped caring.
Really?
But when it comes to pinball, does everything go back to like Bagatelle? Is that where all those games came from, like pachinko and pinball?
Yeah,
and
it's. I mean, pinball has a very kind of weird history because. At least in America, because for a long time it was illegal in many cities.
Really?
New York, pinball was illegal in New York until like 1977 because
What?
LaGuardia equated it with gambling. And a lot of the guys that
my gosh.
sold the pinball machines were the mobsters because they were all tied to gambling houses.
That
and things
late
like
in the
Yeah,
70s?
so LaGuardia, there's some great photos of LaGuardia dumping pinball machines into the East River.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so he
It's
killed
like
all,
that's like the
killed all
equivalent of like Fahrenheit 451 burning books.
Right, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and so
Right.
at least in New York, arcades, and it was really video games that helped bring pinball back to New York because people were like, well, you can't. This is video games. It's harmless. You're just you're just playing, right? It's not like pinball. It's not gambling.
if you're winning an extra ball, that's not really gambling.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, that's why the games kind of went the way they did. I mean, they were never cash out pinball machines, not that I remember.
No,
but
right.
but it was just always associated with like
You
to
could
think
win
of
an extra game,
right?
you know,
And
but
all
like-
the greasers, right? They would hang out in the pinball,
Oh,
and then
greasers.
then they would get into rumbles and
Sean
things
and
like
I
that.
would hang out there.
right? Exactly. A bunch of
Yeah.
lowlifes. So,
Fonzie would always get that extra
Right.
ball.
Yeah, you hit the
Hooligans.
machine and you get the ball.
right.
But pachinko in
that's-
Japan,
yeah, it's
now
huge.
that is a cash out thing, even though it's not really legally
Right.
that's how it works. They've got a thing where like it's a it's
kind
just
of
a
an
way of dancing
understanding,
around
yeah.
the law where you win a bunch of balls and you bring the balls to a place and you get a token and then you
Right,
take
right.
the token
You
and
don't
then
get
you
a
get
little
money.
You don't get a little prize.
Well, you get
sometimes.
you get money at the end of it all
Right,
if
right.
if depending on where you're playing this pachinko.
Yeah, they have actually really good prizes in Japan. I was there. I spent many years in the late '90s working over there. Worked for a Japanese video game company, and the prizes that you would get out of like the claw machines. That
Yeah.
Oh,
first of
yeah.
all,
Oh, we know.
they actually worked, right? Like the claw, you could
right.
grab things and get prizes. And
Oh, yeah.
unlike
The
the American
greatest
ones.
prizes.
Yeah, really cool. Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
If you're a nerd, you're really great. Yeah.
So as you're talking, like pinball machines, they became more advanced and sophisticated, partly as an answer to video games.
Yeah. They had to survive.
Because there was a pinball arcade. I grew up in State College, Pennsylvania, and there was a college town, and it may even still be there. There's an arcade called Playland, and that was where I would play pinball. And I still remember, like, the day I went down there one weekend and I saw this thing called Space Invaders. Everybody was huddled around it, like, what the fuck is this thing?
Yeah, it made
was the
noises,
first,
and it was cool,
And then
and-
you saw the first Pac-Man, and then that changed everything, And were you involved at all in like that game-changing event?
Well, not making it, but I have very distinct memories of the first time I saw Pong, which was
Did we all have Pong?
Yes.
Yeah.
We all had Pong, yeah.
Yeah,
and I remember when you first put that in, that was like sorcery. I mean, it was like, what the fuck? And then they tell you, like, don't have it on the TV that you like too much because it'll ingrain it into the screen.
Yeah, the home invasion
Yeah,
of the Pong and the Pong clones.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that was that's where Atari comes from, right?
Right.
The company and Nolan Bushnell, and he created the industry. And it's fascinating. Pong, the story of Pong. So Pong wasn't the first video game. It wasn't the first video game, and B, it wasn't the first video game that was commercially available.
No. Do tell.
So the first
First, it was called Ping.
No.
Pong.
So the original,
Very smelly.
The original game was called Tennis for Two, and it was created in was it 56 or
Really?
6? Yeah, it was 1956, and
Was
it
it
was
like two people reenacting it on a stage?
It was.
You had electrodes connected to their heads.
You're not-
and you made them play tennis.
You're not far off. It was actually. It wasn't a video game. It was created on an oscilloscope. And so they would use the sound. Essentially, you were adjusting the frequencies with the
okay,
dial,
yeah.
but they managed to make two paddles and a ball that would bounce. So it would show. So you played it on
And
this.
it doubled as a Geiger counter.
Yeah,
too.
well, the funny thing was it was attached to this massive supercomputer that was at a government research center. The first if the United States government had patented video games, every video game would have been made by the military or by the government, right? But they didn't. They didn't think it was. They thought it was just this stupid thing that these kids working at this because there's throughout.
Let's play a game.
Well, pretty much through the world, through history, whenever you get kids in front of a large piece of hardware, they end up making a game on it, right? And so this is what happened. They made this game Tennis for Two, and so a lot of people toured the lab because it was part of this very impressive computer and technology, and so all these nerds went through and saw Tennis for Two, and one of them was Bushnell. He had heard about it, and Bushnell had a background in. He used to work at like amusement parks, and he ran the arcades. And this was back when it was all like BB shooting guns
Right,
and electromechanical games and light gun games and things like that. The second video game is called Space Wars. And Space Wars was made at MIT, and it was made by a guy named Steve Russell. And Steve, he was a big sci-fi fan, and so he made this game of two little spaceships flying around shooting at each other. And then the interesting thing was all the other students, they loved this game, and so they started doing mods to it. It was the first mod. It was also the first game that a video game tournament was played with. And all these students, they built a realistic simulation of the star field that was over MIT. So now the ships were flying on the star field.
Wow.
And another guy added realistic gravity so the ships would move towards the sun.
Is
in
that
the
a game
middle.
that eventually you saw in the arcades?
Yes, eventually you saw it in the
It was like a
arcades. It's called
two-person.
Computer Space.
Yeah,
was
I
the
remember
was so once again Bushnell saw. I'm sorry, he had seen Computer Space, not Tennis for Two, but he saw Computer Space, and he said this would make a really great. People would pay money for this. So he made Computer Space. He made this really gorgeous, elaborate arcade cabinet for it. If you watch Soylent green, there's a copy
Yes.
of Computer
Oh,
Space.
yeah.
That's what that is.
And that's the first video game, all right? The first commercial video game. And so, but the problem was Computer Space was too complicated. People couldn't get it. They couldn't wrap their heads around it, and it was a failure. So, but
Was there a joystick? Or?
there were like knobs and buttons,
Knobs and
and
buttons,
like there was a
okay.
whole bunch of different controls. It's too complicated for audiences of the early 70s. So Bushnell goes to his lead programmer, a guy named Al Alcorn, and he says, "I want to make a game that's so easy that a drunk can play it." And so Al Alcorn makes Pong, which is essentially tennis for two, and they put it into a bar up in San Jose called
Look, there's
Drunkards.
Jack. He can play it.
yeah, it's the game is put in this bar called Al Caps, which is now actually a
Al
comedy.
Caps.
Yeah. And it's actually now a comedy club. Now, if you go up to San Jose,
Really?
and it's the place where Pong was first installed. And the first week that they put it in, they get this phone call, and the guy.
Hey,
the guy
I just want to say, I really love your game.
Well, no, it was actually the bar owner, and he said, "Hey guys, something's wrong with your game. It's broken. You got to come and fix it." And so they said, "Oh, all right, what is it?" And the cabinet that they made was all handmade, and the thing to collect the quarters was like a Tupperware thing, kind of like bolted to the door, and it was all like very jury rigged.
Right,
And
right.
so Al Alcorn drives down to this bar, and he's like, "Oh, what's wrong with this thing?" And he opens up the cabinet, and like all these quarters spill out. And what had happened was so many people had played the game, the quarters had spilled out of the Tupperware and onto the motherboard and shorted out the motherboard. And so they're like, "We've got a hit on our hands. We got to make more of these things." So that's where Atari comes from, is that they started manufacturing. Like, literally, they were hand making these things. They had, the demand was so great they couldn't keep up, so they hired a bunch. There's actually a lot of local San Jose women came in, and they were building these things, and then it just took off. And then people said, "Well, there's got to be a way to do this at home." And at the same time, there was a fella named Ralph Baer. He worked for, I want to say, like Magnavox. And he said, "Oh, there must be a way that we can project images onto a TV screen." And so he developed a system called the Odyssey. And that was the first home system. And it came out pretty much concurrently with when Pong came out. So this is like 1973 or somewhere around there. But the thing that was interesting about the Odyssey was it could play 16 games. They were all built in. And then he contacted this little company in Japan that had been making, they're a toy maker. They originally were a card maker, but they were a toy maker. And they had made this light gun that if you shot it at a screen, you could interface with a TV screen. And he's like, "Oh, that's really cool. I want to have that in my system." And so he cut a deal with that company and said, "If you let me use your light gun, I'll let you distribute my game system, my home game system in Japan." And they're like, "That sounds like a great deal. We'll do it." And that little company was Nintendo. And so that's how Nintendo got its start in video games, was by being the official sales group for the Odyssey. And then later they said, "We can do this ourselves." And they made the Nintendo Entertainment System.
So the Odyssey system, I had Pong.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, the Odyssey predates Pong. But once again,
Predates Pong.
too complex for, like, people literally could not wrap their heads around the idea that if I take this box and hook it into the back of my TV set, I'm able to play something. They literally,
Right,
like, it
it's
blew their minds.
Right.
And so once again, the simplicity of Pong, which was, two knobs and a ball that bounced back and forth, people understood that, and that's why it sold so well at home.
And
that's why you had one.
I remember, it was like, oh my God, 2 different size paddles.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
there's 4 paddles instead of 2.
Flip a switch and it looks like a hockey player instead of a little stick.
I don't
You ever
know.
see that one?
No.
Oh,
no.
yeah. I had the fancy one.
Wow. Wow. And so Odyssey, though, had many more games.
Oh,
now,
16 games.
And they were different than Pong?
There were sports games. There was checkers. There was chess. There was a light gun game. There was a maze game. Yeah,
Wow,
I
I
mean, they're
didn't know
still
that.
And it
very
just didn't
crude.
sell? It just
didn't sell.
It was
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, but he essentially Ralph Baer invented the home market, and many people consider him the father of video games, or at least maybe the grandfather, because his innovation was so ahead of. Literally, it between Bushnell and Baer, those are the two kind of the creators of the industry.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, after Pong and this is okay.
So
Odyssey
late
doesn't.
70s.
Yeah, Odyssey doesn't really go.
right.
Pong hits.
Right, 75 or 4 for Pong.
And so what follows that? We got
Okay.
like the Atari system.
Well, yeah,
or?
that's the Atari 2600. So Bushnell says, instead of having a system that is just one game, let's have a system that we can change the cartridges.
Right.
And so actually the Odyssey had cartridges, but they were essentially things that you slipped in to kind of trigger the motherboard to say, oh, now you're playing this game.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
But Bushnell said, well, we can save on memory. We don't have to spend as much on the unit if we put it all in the cartridge.
Right.
And so that's the big innovation of that, and the joystick, of course. That's the other huge innovation.
And now, Gina, you played Atari 2600.
yeah.
What
Oh,
were the
yeah.
ones you played?
Well, Space Invaders, which it got to a point where you couldn't die because it was too easy.
For you, yeah.
And Missile Command was another one that was
Oh yeah.
And
No.
then there was a skiing game. Did you play the skiing
Yeah,
game?
I remember the skiing game.
Yeah, and then there was a thing where it said in there, if you play the one game and you get a certain time, because you're trying to get the fastest time going down the ski hill, you could take a picture of your TV screen and send it in.
That's an Activision game.
Yes.
So Activision had a whole achievement system based on their games that you could get patches. They're very collectible now. These patches that were you sent in your high score, and you would get in it. Did you get a patch?
Did you get a patch?
You know what? I never got.
You never got the patch?
You sent it in,
Lost
right?
in the mail.
I
My
bugged
Haunted
my
Mansion
parents,
game.
because back then, of course, we had film in our cameras.
Right.
So we took a picture of the TV, and I wanted it to go in, and my mom's like, "Oh, we still have 10 pictures
You know what? I remember that excuse. Hey, when are we going to get this developed? No, we got 10 more pictures. We're going to go to Yosemite
right.
soon.
So it took
crap.
a while, but
Fuck
I
Yosemite.
did send it in, and never got anything.
Never got.
Really?
Yeah, I got a pair of very tight-fitting pants. Yeah.
Now, at the same time, this is when games are starting to appear in arcades too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is like...
So, I mean, the irony is that everybody, like a lot of people that aren't versed in it, they're like, oh, what came first? And the thing was, they all kind of happened at the same time.
Right.
The home market, the arcade market, and the handheld market all essentially happened all at the same time.
Right.
Because it was all parallel technology. It was a lot of the same creators finding new ways to make these things. So for example, the handheld system, which now eventually is mobile gaming or the Nintendo DS or things like that, originally was a thing called Game & Watch. And there's, in my history of video games class, there's the unsung hero who is a guy named Gunpei Yokai. And he was the guy who invented the light gun for Nintendo, but he also invented pretty much every major piece of technology that Nintendo sold for like 30 years. And he was a genius. And he invented this thing called a Game & Watch, which was an LED screen with this D-pad. He invented the D-pad, and he had a couple of buttons, and you would, just kind of move this little LED guy back and forth. And then eventually they went to like double screens, and but you could never play more than one game on them. They were always a single game, but they made I want to say 30 or 50 of these things, like all different types of just original games, like fun little games. And in that technology, the D-pad and the button configuration on the Game & Watch was what the Nintendo team used as a prototype for the Nintendo Entertainment System, or what was called the Famicom in Japan, family computer. That was the prototype controller for the Famicom. So Gunpei's legacy is Game & Watch to NES to SNES to DS. Oh, Game Boy. He also invented the Game Boy. He invented the Virtual Boy.
Wow.
He like I said, every major tech innovation this guy is responsible for.
It's interesting because, again, this place that I would go to, this arcade playland, I mean, it was my hangout. I would go there every weekend. And in this peak time, I saw how more and more video games are making space in the arcade, and then they're pushing the pinball machines
I know.
back.
Pinball, yeah.
And it was almost like to a point that it was like 80%
That
video
happened-
games.
That happened at my golf land as well, right? It was the same.
Yeah. But I did get into a lot of the video games too. I mean, I got into Space Invaders and Pac-Man, but there are others that. I mean, Centipede, Frogger, right? I mean,
Tempest.
What was Frogger?
Frogger was like just literally you're just a frog.
I don't know Frogger.
You don't know Frogger?
Really?
I didn't play
Dude,
these
you're
games.
a frog trying to cross the street. And you
That's
get run
what
over.
it is.
speeding
Yeah.
car.
The
Cars
frog.
across
Wait a
the
minute.
street.
Whoa. Wait a minute. The frog has to get across the street.
Right, without getting hit by a
It's a
car.
busy
And so that's what it is.
Yeah,
and then-
you
That's what it
avoid
is.
cars.
Yeah.
And then across the river, right?
Yeah, and
Then across a river,
Right.
and then you avoid just the
That's
water
it.
or fish. Or
Well, you get on the back of logs, and you get on the back of. You try not to get on the back of alligators,
Yeah.
because they'll eat you.
Okay.
and then you kind of get in into one of your little lily pads, and sometimes there's a fly in there, and you get bonus points for the
Ooh,
fly.
all right.
Or there
Okay.
might even be a little sexy girl frog, and you get into there, and you
See?
get points
You
for
like
her.
this game.
I like this.
Yeah, there's a whole drama.
But the one
How
game
do you win?
You don't, because those because those
Just
are
like
the
life.
days. Well, those were the days that there were two ways to win a video game. One was you either beat your high score and you walked away
okay.
satisfied, or you got to what's called a kill screen. And Pac-Man has the most famous kill screen, which is, I forget what the number is that you get to, but essentially after you play like 256 boards or something like that of Pac-Man, the game literally, the data, the RAM can't handle the buffer essentially overfills, and it stops drawing.
The
half
game
of the
gets
screen.
bored. The game is like,
yeah.
fuck this.
Yeah, exactly.
Go away.
Yeah, it takes like I want to say like 8 or 16 hours or something like that
Wow.
to play.
I
like
think
a full game of
I'm not sure, but
Pac-Man.
I'm pretty sure my wife got to the end because
Yeah.
she is
Really?
like,
She's
no, my
crashed
wife
the
is
kill
like
screen?
really great
Yeah.
with
Wow.
Pac-Man,
Yeah.
and Miss Pac-Man is what she played.
Well,
most
Miss
of the time.
Pac-Man doesn't have that problem.
It doesn't.
They
Okay.
solved that problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, Miss people would argue that Miss Pac-Man is the better game of the two.
It's the one you always see around
Yeah.
still, not the original
Well,
Pac-Man.
Miss-
Is it
Yeah,
like harder to play or just easier to work the
It's-
controls? Or?
So Miss Pac-Man,
sexier.
It's
Well, there's that,
There's a bow.
right, of
Yeah,
course.
it's transgender Pac-Man.
Right.
There's Miss Pac-Man is superior for a few reasons. One, the mazes change, so it's a little
Oh,
Right, that's
Oh,
right.
all
That's
right.
right.
It's
Yeah.
just it's
That is
it's a little easier to control. It's just a cuter version,
yeah.
right, of Pac-Man. The interesting thing about I worked for Namco for many years, the guys that make Pac-Man and all that. And Miss Pac-Man and Galaga are the two games that have always been in continuous. They've always been in the arcade
Yeah,
since their
yeah.
creation.
It's the spaceship one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The-
Is it-
That's my
that's kind of
favorite.
cool.
Well, the original
That's
was
my favorite.
Galaxian, and then Galaga is the sequel.
Oh,
Right,
okay,
right.
okay,
So
okay.
See, now
really,
you pronounce it Galaga.
Yeah.
I always pronounce it Galaga.
yeah, you know why?
Why?
Because I learned from the guy who invented it how to pronounce
It's
it.
Galaga.
Yeah,
So
Sean.
when I
Wow.
worked at Namco,
Wrong again.
in the 90s, one of my great experiences was I was touring Namco and I was going through these and back in the 90s it was very crowded office, like very tight cubicles with
Right.
huge stacks of paper,
Like office
and
space.
these guys are like smoking like chimneys, right? And because it's Japan, right? And I'm touring the facility and they go, Skato-san, you should meet this guy. He's the inventor of Galaga. And I'm like, oh my gosh, really? Galaga? And he's like, no, it's Galaga. And then he goes, he didn't speak any English, but he's like, wait a second, wait. He's like waving his hands. And he ran back to his desk and he brought back these yellowed pieces of paper. And it was the original designs of Galaga. And I held them and I like looked, it was like holding the Declaration of Independence or something.
Wow.
Well, because it was like a better version of Space
Oh, yeah,
Invaders.
yeah.
It was much more exciting. I mean,
Right. And all those arcade games are just iterations on each other, right?
Yeah.
Like
Right.
if you draw a line from Breakout, the game
like that
Steve
one.
Jobs and Wozniak invented,
Yeah.
that is, you go from Breakout to Super Breakout to Space Invaders to Galaxian to Galaga. Like you can see a very clear line of how these games progressed because they were just building
And
off of the last one.
I love that one because it had the bonus round.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's what made it stand out.
Right, that's true.
And the beam that you could get your ship
Oh, yeah,
capture to
yeah.
get double
Yes.
firing.
Okay, you have to clear something up for me because there was around that time there were those kind of games that had that color like Space Invaders and
Yeah, those are called raster. There's raster and vector.
Okay.
Raster is Galaga and Pac-Man. Vector is Tempest, Battlezone.
that's the
and-
ones with the little lines,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
Yes,
right.
and
Okay.
I really like the clean look of
Yep.
those.
Those
Yeah,
were
they're
neat.
gorgeous, yeah.
Those were neat, and there was a couple spaceship ones, and
Yep,
was
Star
there
Castle
was there a home one called the Vectrex?
Vectrex. I own a Vectrex. It's gorgeous. It's a highly prized collectible
Is it really?
from game collectors. Yeah.
Physically, does it hold up over time?
Yeah, it's the size of a little Macintosh, right? It's the first portable video game console because it had a handle in the back and you could fold up the controllers into
Cool.
it. When you popped it in, for my money, it was the truest home arcade system for the time because you have to remember that the graphics chips of the Atari 2600 and the Intellivision and the ColecoVision, they couldn't match the fidelity of the motherboards were too big to,
Right.
all that
Right,
stuff
right.
had to
Yeah.
be laid out by hand, right? It didn't have the capacity. And so for me, I was always a graphics snob when it came to video games. As a matter of fact, even though I had played them, I didn't really fall in love with video games until Donkey Kong, because that was the first one that looked like little cartoon characters,
Right,
and then
right.
Dig Dug and things like that. And so Vector, but I loved the Vector games. I loved Star
Yeah.
Castle, and there was a game called Warriors that was like the first 2-player fighting game that was knights fighting each other on top view, and there was Tempest. And
Okay,
there was
we have to
About
talk about.
Tron.
Oh yeah, Tron.
Well, Tron,
that's a
yeah,
different-
That's
kind of a combination of
Yeah, that
those.
was the first. I think it was the first game that had multiple games in it. Because remember, it had 4.
Right,
The original
right.
one
You
had
did
4
discs,
games.
you could do the
Well,
light
the disc
cycles.
was later.
That almost made me want to play video games, that game. Because I remember seeing that console.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
And I was
yeah.
like,
Oh, yeah.
God, that's
Yeah, yeah.
beautiful.
The cabinet with that glowing stick.
Yeah,
it was beautiful.
And I
It
even
was
and I
beautiful.
played a couple times, and I have to say, I came as close to enjoying a video game as I think I was going to get.
But Tempest, I just love because it was so unique to me.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's all abstract. It's surreal. I mean, you're basically, it's geometric shapes, and you're along the top edge of like a tunnel.
Yeah, it was like 3D effect, right?
And the things are coming out of the tunnel, and there's panels, and you have to kind of
And you have
kind
the
of
spinning
avoid them.
guy
and it's
and,
just there's just something about it that's really cool. And
I did like
it's
that one.
still-
It was cool.
That one, and there was a vector beam game called Tail Gunner.
Oh, I love Tailgunner.
That's my favorite because they were like
I was obsessed.
vaguely Star Trek ships.
Total
you know,
Star
they
Trek.
looked
It was
like
Klingons.
ships,
Yeah.
but you were in the back of the ship. The starfield was going away from you.
Yes.
So you're a tail gunner in the back of the spaceship, and things are coming at you.
That's
and you have to
novel.
shoot you, and you had a certain
Force
amount of
field.
time,
Yeah.
a force field, and
Yeah,
it would
yeah.
bounce off away
off,
from you.
yeah.
It was so
Wow.
cool.
And if the ships would hit the force field, then they'd kind of float backwards,
Right.
and then that's when
Yeah.
you had to shoot
That's when
them.
you got 'em, yeah.
And the sound effects on that tail
Yeah.
gunner was amazing. Now I know that there was a console one, and there was also a one that you could sit in
cockpit.
And,
Yes,
and
yes.
Sean, that's the one that I played because the cockpit, it kind of blocked out all the sound that was going on
Yeah,
in the
yeah. You know,
arcade.
you were like
and
right
I
there.
felt I was in outer space.
Well, what I love Tail Gunner as well, and what I remember is growing up in San Diego, there were some great arcades, and I played. There was a copy of Tail Gunner that you actually sat back to back like the snow speeders in Empire Strikes Back, and so you had one guy shooting out of the front and in the back, so you were like talking to each other. Hey, he just flew by me. Go
Oh my
get
God,
the,
that's
go get him.
awesome.
And yeah, it was
Now,
very
I heard
cool.
an interesting story about Tail Gunner, which was the technology of the time. There was kind of a design flaw. I've talked to some people who have tried to find that game now. It's like, oh, well, we can refurbish it. But there was like a design flaw where the electronics that were used in it, they would short out or something. There were like certain issues with that
Yeah.
game. So to find a vintage one,
Yeah, it's probably pretty hard.
It's like
Yeah, you-
virtually impossible.
Because you can still find, in arcades, you can still find Tempest,
yeah.
but you hardly
Yeah.
ever see Tail Gunner anymore.
Yeah.
Did they, and they never made that for home use or anything like that. That was a vector game?
Yeah, it was all vector game.
Okay.
I think they made a Vectrex version of it because vector is very different than so television sets are a raster display, right? They're bitmap, what we call bitmap display, and so they're individual pixels. But raster, one of the appeals to it, besides that nice clean line, is that you essentially would draw points in space with the code, and then the code would draw the lines in between them. But you could never, like later games, they found a way to kind of fill in the shapes.
Right.
But early on, they couldn't do that. It was too advanced, and so you could not replicate that on home TVs. They just weren't made to draw vector images. They were made to do raster. Now, the interesting thing about the vector games is that is eventually what became computer movie graphics. So I worked with for a while one of the producers on Tron, the 80s Disney movie, and she told me the story of how they drew the light cycles. They had no visual input. They had to guess where all the points were. So all those light cycles were created by guess. Like they kind of were like, well, we kind of think it's here and here, and if we connect it here, this is what's going to happen. And then they would like render it, and it would take like weeks to render it. And then like they were off by one point, and so like something was sticking out too far,
Right.
and so they had to go back and move that point and re-render it.
It's like, well, once you had one correct, then you were set, right? Then you could
Maybe.
replicate them. or-
Well, yeah. Once you got it, then yeah, you had that model, and now you could do other things and move it in space and things like that. But literally, they were shooting blind on Tron. They had no clue. Like, what are we going to get? We know what we want it to look like, but what's it really going to look like? And then it would come out, and it was like, well, all right, that's not right. Let's do it again.
It's not my favorite movie, but the look of that movie, I think, still holds up
still
today.
love
Yeah.
to watch it. Yeah.
Everybody equates that look with video games. Like it,
Yeah,
is-
yeah.
it was such a huge just a mind-blowing visual, right? Like this,
Right.
this is this thing that doesn't exist at all.
Right, right.
It's just points in space.
Which we kind of take for granted
Oh,
now. I mean,
well.
look at. I mean, when you really stop and think about it, movies now, when it's good CGI, it's kind of insane. I mean, we just watched Rampage. Yeah. Not the greatest movie. I mean, it's a big, dumb, loud, obvious movie, but I mean, the creature effects are amazing in it. It's like
Remember when they couldn't do hair?
yeah.
That was the thing.
That's one thing.
That
Is
was the big
Hollywood
one.
has got down the CGI ape.
Yep.
I mean, they got it perfect now.
Okay, let me ask a question here, because we're kind of what you guys are talking about. It's like in the like mid '80s, and you're talking about hair and stuff. Now there was a big movie,
Not the musical.
There was a big movie that was huge, and my understanding was video game company had to rush to try to put this together, and it was the E.T. game.
Oh, right.
Now, could you
yeah.
tell me a little bit about
Sure.
this infamous E.T. game?
So a lot of people blame E.T. for the crash of the video game. So in 1983 in America, the video game industry was dead. Like, people thought they were
Really?
never
That
going to make.
quickly, like-
oh yeah. They were like, "This is it. The fad's over. This is never going to happen again.
So
We're
like
done with everything."
Was it peaking like 80, 81, and then like
Yeah, 81, 82. So what happened was the Atari 2600 comes out, the Intellivision comes out, the ColecoVision comes out, and they essentially say, well, those companies aren't just making the games. We're going to open it up to other companies. They essentially licensed out the rights to make all these games. And all these people, it was like the gold rush. They were like, oh my God, we're going to make all
Right.
this money. So all these companies started to make games, and some of them were good, and a lot of them were really bad. But what's even worse was that a lot of these companies completely misgauged the audience. They're like, oh, kids play these things, so they've got to be interested in Bible stories, right? So there's like video games and Bible stories. Or other companies would go, oh, adults like video games, let's make a porno video game, right? And so this is where you get like Custard's Revenge and games like that. Or just
What was the custard?
it was General Custer.
Oh.
not custard. That's a different kink. And so they literally flooded the market with like inferior quality things, and so the
okay.
prices dropped, and everybody went, "Oh, this stuff is garbage. All the games that are being made are garbage." It was really rare to get a good game on the game systems. So E.T. comes along, and Universal goes, "We have to have a game for this movie, right? We got to do it." So they go to Atari, and Atari's got a bunch of hotshot programmers, and this one fella. They say, "Hey, can you make?" He was like one of their best programmers. And I say, "Hey, can you make this?" He's like, "We've only got 6 weeks to make this game." And he goes, "Sure, I can do it. I can do anything." He was cocky, but he also probably wanted to keep his job. Plus, it was the movie that everybody was
Right.
predicting
I mean, it's
to
a
be
giant movie.
predicting to be the big movie, right? So he's like, "We have to have it by Christmas, right?" And so this has always been kind of the Achilles heel of the gaming industry, is this deadline for Christmas, right? Now I think we're getting past that finally as industry. But for a long time we were held slave to that holiday, right? And so this guy made E.T. in 6 weeks, and I mean, to his credit, he made a game that was finger quote playable, but it's not a good game at all. It's a really lousy.
What is the premise of the game?
The premise of the game is you're E.T., you're walking around, you're collecting little Reese's Pieces, you fall into holes, you stretch your neck to help you levitate back up, and then there's a kind of a CIA guy in a trench coat following you around trying to capture you, and if you get captured, you essentially get sent back to the beginning and you have to do it all over again. And it's a very cruel game. Like, talk about the game
crude.
designer. Well, it's crude, but it's also cruel because it's mean. It's very mean-spirited to the player. Like, it's a very hard game to play, and the controls suck, and the graphics are 8-bit, and so they're not great.
Could you recognize that that's E.T.?
Kind of. I mean, he looked more like E.T. than Superman from the Superman game from about 4 or 5 years before that.
Right.
Or Spider-Man from the Spider-Man game, because those are literally just like this jumble of red and blue colored dots or squares.
Was that pre-Journey? The Journey game, Journey Escape? Wasn't that a game?
Journey
Based on the band?
Yeah, the band Journey.
Yeah. It's
And
before.
if I remember, there was a thing where like the premise of that game was like there were these
Steve Perry
groupies.
falls in a hole.
It loses his voice. They have to get a new singer from the Philippines. No. But there were like these little groupies portrayed as hearts, and they're chasing the band members.
I mean, I know of the game, but I haven't actually played it.
If that
so.
didn't kill the video game
Well,
industry.
yeah, but once again, it was just all this weird subpar stuff. And so E.T. gets the blame for killing the market, but
Right.
really it's just a glut of crappy products.
So, but they
Right.
made millions of these
Yeah.
cartridges,
Well, they
anticipating that this was going to be a huge hit.
Christmas, right?
They made more cartridges than actual Atari 2600s existed. So that's a level of confidence that is very ballsy. And then as a result, all these distributors ended up with all this stock that they couldn't sell.
They could not sell them.
And so one of these distributors, buried the excess stuff because they couldn't sell it in a landfill in New Mexico. Now that's where the rumor was that the game was so bad that they, like John Gotti style, they buried the body out in the desert. And that's not really the truth. The truth is it was this distributor who did bury it into a landfill, but it wasn't like the bulk of the, it wasn't like
one
the whole,
distributor.
Yeah, it was just one distributor, right? So, but they did excavate it years and years later.
Well, now there's a document.
Yeah, there's a great documentary called Game Over.
Game Over.
Yeah, and it's all about finding these old ET cartridges.
And there'd be every time that they
But there's
thought
other
that they
ones
were
in there as
going to
well.
discover
Right.
this, cache of games, people would come from all over
Oh,
the
right,
place
right.
and hoping to see it.
Yeah, they want because it had built up in the industry. So I started professionally making video games in the early 90s. And by that point, that had already been a legend. But the thing was, we knew kind of what the industry, like what had happened. So it was kind of a half truth more than a myth, right? Like people were alive that had worked on this thing. So they're like, well, that's not quite what happened. And so we all knew that, well, that's not quite what happened. But this myth within the fan community grew and grew and grew into a point where it literally became this myth, this mythical thing. So it's only a half truth, but the documentary is totally worth watching because it's very
It's a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So as you're saying how this is early 80s now, there is kind of this decline.
It died. It was a crash.
Including arcades as well?
No, arcades managed to survive this, and part of it, ultimately the reason why arcades still survived was because of malls. Because malls were so popular,
yeah,
right?
there was a great mall here in L.A. At the Fox Hills Mall, Sega Center.
Yep. Yeah.
And I love that place. I mean, they even
one of the
filmed
last arcades in this area.
the movie Nightmares, the anthology film.
That's right, with the
Emilio
video game.
Estevez.
Yeah, the
they
video
filmed
game
it
story.
at Sega Center. Yeah.
Nice.
But so when was the next big change? Because then you started seeing those first-person shooter games. You started seeing
but those are later.
Those are later. Like, what was the
first? We're getting Japan. So Nintendo has been chugging away. So the industry doesn't crash in Japan. Actually, it's thriving. And more companies, Capcom and Namco and Sega and Konami and all these guys are doing well in the arcades. They're making all these really great games. This is where like Ghosts and Goblins and Yaya Karate and Kung Fu Master and a lot of space-themed games and things like that are popping up. And then Nintendo creates the Famicom. This is their home console, and it takes a couple of years to get to the US. Mainly, if you look at pictures of the Famicom, it's kind of this red and white, very toy-looking machine. But the Nintendo that we get, the NES, is a gray, slick-looking thing, and that was because the American market had been so kind of burned by the video game industry that they were like, well, nobody wants to buy these kids' toys anymore. And so they had to say, well, let's market it to an older audience. Let's make it look
a more sophisticated electronic device.
Yeah, let's make it look like consumer electronics. And so by the time the NES came to America, the Famicom had already had like 2 or 3 years of being out and about. And so we have games like Super Mario World and a lot of other, Duck Hunt and the classic.
Don't get me started on those.
The classic Nintendo games are all launch titles for the NES because they had already been made and proven successful. And Japan had this very smart business strategy, which was, and it kind of bit America in the butt for a long time, which was Japan was very selective about what they exported, but America was always we'll just give you everything. And so for a long time, everybody was like, well, American games are kind of crappy, but the Japanese games are the best. And it's because we only ever saw the best Japanese games. It was kind of like, like there's that rumor about like Picasso, and he's got this castle, and in the castle, all his crappy paintings have been stashed, right? That's essentially what Nintendo did, is they had a very strict, like a gateway system, policy about what games could be exported, and that's what the Nintendo seal of approval is. Boop, saying that you cannot. These are games that are good, and all the rest is this garbage. And so Japan had a big flood of garbage games, just like America did, but we never saw them.
Right. Okay.
Wow. Super Mario, okay? I had a friend, and again, this is my second round of almost getting into video games. A friend of mine gave me the very first Nintendo, not Super Nintendo,
the
just
NES,
regular Nintendo.
Right.
And I get this thing, and he gives me, and I think I get like 3 cartridges. I forget what they were, but I know that one of them was Duck Hunt
Right.
and Super Mario.
Yep.
And I played Super Mario, and I got to this place where I started playing Super Mario and got into it.
Yeah.
Like, it really started to matter to me. And I played it, and then my girlfriend at the time started playing it, and we were both playing it, and everybody was playing it, and I was like staying up late playing it. And then I got to a place where I was just, what am I doing with my life? This is starting
I
to
have
become...
toys to collect.
Well, but see, that's the thing, is that it became too important. Now, look, obviously, look around us. I still partake in things that really aren't that important in the big scheme of life, depending on how you look at it. But it was the amount of time that I was putting in.
Yeah.
And then I think about games now where you almost have to take notes. They're so
You had to take
complex.
notes back then as well. Those were passwords, and you had to enter them in.
There
so
you go.
could
And
save
forget
them.
that. There's like cheats and like, no way. No,
Well, I'm here to tell you, as a video game player and a collector of toys, that you can do both.
Tell me how. Seriously, because there are so many games that, like, and I have nerd friends that will go, I can't believe that you're not a gamer because all this stuff is speaking to you, and I just don't get it. And Gina, I mean, I know you've had these conversations with me.
And you played Nintendo and Super Nintendo. You get into all that.
And I want to ask you about this. When I bought the Nintendo, the first one, I bought the expensive one that came with a robot.
Oh, Rob, yeah.
What?
Because it was a robot, so I had to have
The
it.
robotic operating buddy.
Yes.
Rob.
What was the robot?
It was the most ridiculously stupid thing.
Did you like it, though?
I mean, it looked cool, but there
was
was
lame.
one game, at least that I had,
Yeah.
and it had like a gyroscope or something, and you had to make it spin, and then the characters on the screen, a gate would go up when this one was spinning on the right, and then they had to get through the next gate, so now you had to make the robot pick up this stupid top, basically, and turn to the left, not super fast either, but set it back down so that the next gate would come up. I don't know
great.
Who invented that? But that was the worst.
Yeah. Well, Rob didn't last very long. He was part of the original package for the NES, and then very quickly, because the Japanese were like, robots are cool. Let's have a robot.
They're not wrong.
No, they're not wrong, but this was not the right robot.
Not the wrong place.
Yeah. So they
wrong
ended
time.
up jettisoning poor Rob.
But I mean, it was ridiculous because you could just pick the thing up yourself instead.
Right. I know.
Yeah, that's your
Way
life
faster.
burning up in front of you as you're waiting for this fucking robot to move the thing.
I think there were like 3 whole games you could play with them, because it was always advertised.
4 if you include throwing the thing out the window,
throwing around
betting
the
on where
window.
it lands.
Yeah, and like one of them literally was he would like very slowly turn and pick up something, and then like lift and then turn and then stack it on something else.
Yeah.
And it was just like everybody realized how bad
And that
this
motor
was.
had to have burnt out.
Oh
like,
yeah,
all the time,
yeah,
right?
Probably. I mean, I never had Rob. Matter of fact, this was a period where I kind of lost interest in video games. I was playing arcade games.
Wait a minute,
but
what?
I missed the whole NES because I was in college, or I was just getting into college.
Girls
and booze. And,
there you go.
You know, all that.
There are other buttons you could press.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my board game.
And I actually kind of rediscovered computer games because this was something else that was always as paralleled video games as the
Like
home computer.
CD-ROM, that kind of thing,
even
or before that?
Yeah, so text adventure, of course, were first. Those were contemporaries with D&D and contemporaries with Pong and things like that. And then they started to introduce graphics. And
So originally it was just text.
Yeah, it was like move
Go
left,
into
move
this
right,
tunnel
grab
and-
key,
okay.
Zork.
Gina,
and-
you played some of those,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah, my first one was on a Commodore 64,
Yeah, it was
and
a great system.
I had a not a floppy drive, but a tape
drive. Yep, cassette drive. And then of course it would get jammed and you had to unspool it. And
Remember that.
But the worst part was I had this game and I loved it. It was very Dungeons and Dragons. We were in a castle, and you had to go this way and fight an ogre and all that stuff. And every once in a while, suddenly the program would say, error on line, whatever, and your game was done at that point.
Yeah.
So if you
No.
wanted to start over, you had to reload it. It would take like 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was very unforgiving.
And so this was like text. It was like
Well,
writing at
first
first,
it was
and
text, and then they started making graphics because people are like, I want to see pictures.
Right.
And they had little, very simple little guys that would move around. So, like, I used to play the.
But you still had to tell them what to do.
Well, yeah, you still had to tell them what to do. And then eventually you would use the keyboard, or you might have to buy a joystick and use that to drive the character around. And then eventually they moved into kind of these hybrids. So we're starting to get into the late 80s with this, but LucasArts, the video game wing of George Lucas's multi-million whatever
Oh, we've heard
company,
of him.
right? Heard of that guy? Anyway, he when they first made video games, George was like, I don't want to make any Star Wars games. I want to make all original.
Who
stuff.
that? Want that?
Right. Well, I think he kind of
I want to make,
like
I want to make
man.
Radio Days games.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that was the time period, right? I think-
PHX, the game. You shave your head.
I have no idea why he made the decision, other than either he might have
George.
been burnt out on Star Wars or felt
Burnt
like
out.
well, he had already made 3
He made
movies.
one.
No, he made 3 by this point.
Oh, by this point,
Yeah.
okay, all right.
And-
but he only directed one.
Well, that's
right,
true.
right.
And then, or it might have been because he might have just felt it was too easy, right? He might have said, well,
Too
let's,
obvious.
let's make some
Right.
new stuff instead. And so this is actually what starts to move into the classic era of the graphic adventure game. And so you get games like the Monkey Island games and Maniac Mansion, and then eventually these evolve. The interface of the games, first they start out as like you select a word. The system is called a SCUM system, and it was something like the system for system control utility manager for Maniac Mansion or something like that. And originally you would just pick like take this item or move here, and then eventually they were starting to get away from it, and you would just click your mouse because mice were starting to become a thing, and so you would move. You click on the character, and then if you clicked on him, you would say, oh, do you want to take something, or do you want to talk, or do you whatever, and then eventually it just became pure visual. And so this is where Grim Fandango or Full Throttle or games like that kind of evolve from. And then this is like right at the cusp of when CD technology is starting to come into computers. And then that changes a lot of things because now you can have full audio, or you can have voice acting, or you can have movies play. And this is when Hollywood starts to get interested in the game industry because they're like, oh, wait a second, we make movies, we tell stories, we tell stories better than anyone. These video game kids, they don't know what the hell they're doing. We're going to come in and we'll be owning this place in a matter of months. And
Let me guess.
the joke's on them. The game industry had a realization, which was, well, what's more important, story or gameplay? And for a long time, the conversation was what's more important, story, gameplay. And people would say, well, story, of course, because that's what keeps people involved. People love stories. But then people go, well, Tetris doesn't have a story. And Doom doesn't have a story.
That's one I still do play.
Yeah,
by the
Tetris.
way.
Yeah, exactly. And so for a long time there was this conversation about gameplay versus story, and Hollywood was like, well, we can do this better. And they made like this game with Bruce Willis, and it was a huge flop. They made
what was that?
It was
What
called
was that?
Apocalypse, and it was terrible. They made Spielberg had a deal with them to make a game, but every time they'd make a game, they'd never get it done. Like it would fail, one failure after another. And for years, like he had this deal with EA for decades, and all he made was one game for the Wii. That was like a puzzle game where you throw stuff. It had no story whatsoever in it. The world's greatest storyteller couldn't make a story game to save his life. Right. And so
The format that he just didn't understand it?
Yeah, because they didn't understand the format, right? It requires a different type of thinking. And matter of fact, myself, when I went to film school, and coming from film school, I was a big screenplay guy. And so I was like, story, story, story. And then I get the game and they go, no, gameplay, gameplay, gameplay. Well, fortunately, I had played a ton of games, so I understood gameplay. But it was a hard transition to kind of wrap your head around and go, oh yeah, let's concentrate on the gameplay first, and then we'll worry about the story.
Doesn't it have to be that right combination of both?
Yeah,
right?
well,
I
yeah.
mean,
Ultimately, for me, the answer to the argument is you're both right and you're both wrong. It's got to be both. It can't be one or the other. And I think of it as a cycle. You get the story and the images that get you. You look at the box and you go, ooh, I want to play this. And then you play it and you go, wow, this is really fun. And then the story says, oh, let's find out what happens next. And then you play some more. Oh, this is really fun. And it just keeps going. If you do it right, it's a circle that just keeps going and going.
So I worked on a bunch of these games through Presto Studios,
Right,
San
yeah.
Diego, and worked on the Journeyman project. it, and this game whacked that they eventually did. So this was around the time when like Myst, that was like the big game.
Oh, yeah, right.
Myst was like the equivalent of, remember when you guys all got DVD players and you bought a copy of Avatar and you showed it off on your big screen TV? Myst was that.
Because it looked so beautiful.
Yeah, it was
right?
gorgeous,
Yeah.
right? And it was a very slow puzzle game, but it was, it's gorgeous 3D. It was really when the game industry realized that they could use the tools to make like Toy Story to make video games. They were like, wait a second, the things they used to make Toy Story, we could make video games because it's just the same tech with just a different application. And so all of a sudden you get this huge boom in computer graphics, and now they're making Myst, and they're making Wing Commander, and they're making I don't know. There's a million.
There were a bunch of them,
so
around
many
that time.
games, yeah.
But and then with the Journeyman project, one of the things that they did was they had this idea, and I don't know if it was originally their idea, but the idea of, so I was this character that was an AI,
Right.
and it's a time travel story, but I would be the character, instead of giving you these obvious hints for the game, they turned that thing into a character that would, through humor, give you little tips of like, go into that door, or maybe you don't want to go into this door.
Yeah, and that was pretty. Journeyman Project was pretty ahead of its time in the fact
because that stuff is done all the time now.
Well,
right?
now, Well, the real game that, I mean, we're kind of jumping ahead a bit, but the game that really kind of, like I said, Journeyman Project was way ahead of its time in that, but the games that led to that mentality becoming the norm were games like System Shock and Half-Life. And these are computer games that really, the folks at the Valve, the guys that developed Half-Life, they were like, we want to make a game that doesn't have any cutscenes. Because when CDs came in, everybody was like, hey, we can make all these movies now like Hollywood does, and we can play those in between gameplay, right? So you'd play a level, and then you'd sit and watch like a 20-minute, a half-hour, video clip, a very expensively made
But it's like a
story.
set thing.
Yeah, it was a set thing. You couldn't change it. There was no interactivity. You just watched, and then you would play. You play another level, and when you were done, you'd watch another thing, and you play. And the guys, the Valve team said, we don't want to sit around and watch these stupid movies, and they're really expensive to make, and they're hard to make. You're literally making small animated movies. Let's just forget all this and put it all in the level. We'll do all of this with code. We'll do all of this with art. We'll do all of this with animation. And so through voice acting and through level design and through gameplay, they were able to keep the player immersed in the experience, so that way you never break the gameplay experience. And so that way now you're like,
it's all just merged all together.
Yeah, I'm just playing the game, and if I hear the story, if I stop and listen, I'll hear some of the story, but it's my choice. If I don't want to hear the story, I'm just going to keep going and kill aliens.
And while you're playing the game, you can stop and look around, and everything still looks beautiful and wonderful,
absolutely.
because now you can have all that interactivity without having to make it one thing or another.
So is this when does like things like Grand Theft Auto and all that?
Well,
like,
that's even later, right?
That's even later.
That's
right?
PlayStation 2 era, Xbox era. That's his. PlayStation 1 is like 92, and then PlayStation 2 is like 98 or so, 7 or 8, and then PlayStation. So that's Grand Theft Auto is PlayStation 2. PlayStation 1 is innovative because it handled 3D graphics really well. And so the whole game industry fell back. The game industry is very much in love with technology. And so for me, as a person who loves story and loves art, the Super Nintendo, which was a great machine that made some gorgeous looking games. If you look at, Donkey Kong Country, or if you look at the Super Star Wars games, or you look at there was a game called Booger Man, even though it was gross, it had fantastic animation. Or you get things like there was a game that was all clay animated, right? Like all the characters were like Harryhausen type characters and stuff like that. So there's a lot
Were
of
they actual clay
Oh
animated?
yeah. They were all clay animated. Then they were filmed, and then those images were essentially green screened, and they used them as the frames for traditional animation. All right, so we're going past PlayStation. The industry has fallen in love with 3D, and so everything is 3D, 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 and we unfortunately lose a lot of artistry in this time period. But also CD comes along, and so you start getting these essentially mini movies being shot and being used as cutscenes. So it creates this renaissance in storytelling, because now they have the space to tell all these stories. But eventually we move into the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 and the Nintendo GameCube and the N64, and these systems start to get you to interface with online. first modem stuff, right, through your computer,
Yeah.
and then eventually online play. And this opens up a whole new area of gameplay, which is now you can start playing with other people. You don't need to sit on the couch with them. You can now play with them, and they're
All over the world.
Yeah, they're in Alaska. And the irony is, though, that these multiplayer games have once again been around since the beginning of the video game industry. There were things called multi-user dungeons, and they existed in the 70s and the 80s.
I know what that is.
Yeah, and so, but what the big innovation was, now you had 3D worlds you can run around in. So you're in like EverQuest or Baldur's Gate or things like that. And so now you've got the beautiful graphics, you've got the 3D, you've got the storytelling, and now you can play all this with your friends.
I mean, Gina, I think
Yeah.
was EverQuest the first?
EverQuest was my first.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I almost worked on that game.
Really?
Yeah, almost.
I was just, I could not believe what I was seeing.
Yeah,
and
it's amazing,
how
right?
the play went and everything. And
What was it?
You could just do quests. You could walk around the world, right? Like all by yourself and just like
yeah, I mean, it was this huge world, and all of them are. And you could play any different type of character in all these different cities, and you'd get quests, and you'd kill monsters, and some things you had to get together with a group. Some things you had to do with like 40 people. And it was, I mean, it was just so
Now,
much
40 people in the game.
in the game.
In the game.
But real people.
But they are real people.
Yeah, and you can talk to them.
You're in guilds, so you have a guild full of your own people. And,
Wow.
yeah.
And you have friends.
That's cool.
You have
Yeah.
friends that you might never meet, and there are people that would get married in the virtual world.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And then that led to
Can you
things.
try to talk them out of it?
Maybe if you had the chat line open. Sure. Yeah, but these games evolved into more sophisticated. This is where World of Warcraft comes in, and this becomes like the biggest game in the world, right?
yeah.
And
You know.
Gina played that for. You still play that, right?
No, I don't play that anymore, but I played it from beta, so I played it for many years.
And which faction did you play?
Which do you think I played?
I think you're the Horde.
Oh, no.
Oh,
Is the Horde the ones with the
those
teeth?
are the orcs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially-
they're the ugly ones.
Originally, it was just orcs and humans, and you could
Okay.
either. I mean, it's not good guy, bad guy. They weren't that judgy, but yeah, essentially, it was like, what did you start as? Do you start as a human or an elf or something? Eventually, they added more races, but
Yeah.
originally it was
Like
like humans
cats
and yeah.
What was your
pandas,
faction?
Alliance.
alliance? Yeah,
Lions?
Alliance.
Alliance.
Alliance. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
They were
Think about
they
that.
were the good guys.
Supposedly.
I see.
Supposedly.
Oh.
They look better anyway.
Well, they were humans. So.
Yeah.
and they had shiny armor and stuff.
I can't even
Don't
remember
trust humans.
There was a cow race. What
Yep.
was
Yeah,
it?
there was a panda race as well.
I
Yeah.
think I had quit before the panda
Oh,
race came
okay.
around.
The cow race.
Yeah, there's a whole.
Whose
there's
idea
a-
was that?
There's a whole running joke in Blizzard games about cows because originally in Warcraft there was like a hidden level that had cows because you could run up to the cow and hit them and they explode in blood.
That's where they
and
get
so
ya.
the hidden level was
Joke's on you.
You'd run around and kill all the cows and have a good time, and then everybody would go for burgers afterwards.
This is
Always a good
also-
decision.
And the online games also started using licensed, like they had the Star Wars.
Oh,
Star
yeah,
Wars
yeah,
Galaxies
Star Wars
game,
Galaxies,
right?
yeah,
Lord
yeah.
of the Rings, which
Yeah,
also
yeah.
you played too, right, Jimmy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All of those.
And some of these, there's a
Star
few
Wars,
of them.
The Old Republic.
Yeah, Old Republic, and then there was some of them still exist, like EVE Online, which is a huge space opera. EVE Online is the where the first video game real world heist occurred. It literally took people years to save up like virtual currency to buy. You could buy like massive spaceships. So imagine buying your own Enterprise or your own Star Destroyer or something like that.
And you pay real money for this, or it's just part of the game?
A lot of it was earned. Like paying real money for stuff is a later phenomenon. So
Okay.
so in EVE Online, it was like people essentially they were working hard to earn money to buy their spaceship, right? And one of the factions, something had happened where like somebody had slighted somebody or stolen from her or something like that. And so this one guild essentially said, all right, we're going to take down this other guild. And they essentially like infiltrated the other guild and it took like a year for them to gain the trust of the other guild. And then like on the like somebody was like, all right, now. And like all these agents all through the internet like stole all the ships and like they stole like
my
$1 billion in like virtual assets from these guys. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
That's insane.
Well, and then there's
Imagine if you did that in real life.
Yeah.
there's a lot of companies that make their money by making virtual money in
Right.
like EverQuest or any of these
Oh,
things.
sure, yeah.
And then they sell it to you on eBay and various other
Well,
places.
that was a huge thing in the 90s. It eventually got shut down. So selling of virtual goods, people would pay several thousands of dollars for virtual things, like a great sword or a character that had been built up. or-
Literally thousands of dollars of your
or-
real money.
Why would you shut that down? Like, why legally did they have to
because-
shut that down?
Because A, the companies weren't getting a cut of it.
Oh yeah, right.
And B, there was too many abuses going on. People were getting essentially ripped off.
I see.
My favorite story from that, though, was a friend of mine worked on a game called Virtual Magic Kingdom, which was a Disneyland type game. And when they created the game, when they first made it, they released it in beta testing, right? So people would play it before it was commercially available. And they had a set of green flip-flops that you could put on your little character, and they were just stupid little flip-flops. And then when they released the final version of the game, they were like, those green flip-flops are ugly, let's just leave them out of the game. But the virtual flip-flops still stayed in other people's accounts, and like pairs of these virtual flip-flops would sell for like $3,000 online. For shoes that you cannot even wear. Wow. They sold for $3,000.
Like,
Bizarre.
Black Mirror.
Yeah. Very
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so but this all got eventually shut down. eBay eventually clamped down on all of it. And that was really where the majority of that selling was happening, or at least the big buyers were happening. But now they've found other ways to squeeze money out of people.
It seems like there's this whole other parallel universe. If you're not a gamer, like sometimes I'll walk into a comic shop if it's like 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and suddenly nobody's looking at comics. There's all these kids sitting at tables playing D&D or Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I do not know what's going on. It's their own world. And what you're talking about now, online gaming in a shared universe, I wouldn't even know how to begin. I wouldn't know what kind of technology I need.
Well, you begin by having a computer and paying a company a subscription fee. And so just like your Netflix or anything else, every month you pay, I don't know what World of Warcraft is up to, probably like $25 or something like that.
Is it?
I don't know. Maybe it's
A month?
Maybe it's like $16 a month. I don't know, but it's still pretty pricey. And you get access to run around in this world and have your adventures and all
But
that.
so it's not like a game. This is listen to Old Man Weinhold. It's not like a game where you buy it once and play it.
No. These are
Because they're constantly changing it, right? Updating it?
The gaming industry, with the introduction of online, gaming became a service. So rather than you buy it once and you play it and you're done with it, I mean, that still exists. There's still games that are out there that do that. But now it becomes about getting subscribers. And then it becomes about how do you get them to pay extra things. So, for example, you might want to buy a nice hat for your character. And so you spend 99 cents and buy a nice little virtual hat that you'll never be able to wear. Or you might want some health packs, because if you get hurt in the game, you want to heal yourself rather than earn them or find them. So now you have some health packs. Or you might want to be able to get a great weapon that looks really cool or can kill a lot of bad guys. So you pay, $30 for that cool weapon. Or you might want some additional levels or some additional story content. So you pay $50 for that or whatever, right?
Now it's okay because it's directly from the source.
Yeah, right. It's not. You don't have to worry about going to the store. You don't. If you want to buy that virtual hat at 1 a.m, you can buy that virtual hat at 1 a.m.
In fact, a lot of games are free to play now.
Yes.
And that's how they make their money,
Right.
by putting all these extra things in the game that you want.
Yeah.
I think on my phone once.
Oh, yeah,
I got
a lot of phone games
I got
are.
sucked into that where I was like, "Oh, a free game!"
Yeah.
and
You're
like,
you were buying Smurf berries.
Yeah, like no. Yeah,
Well, this sounds like so fascinating. It's like so advanced. But I want to know, like Sean, you were mentioning, what are the kids into? What is like your nephew
like I said,
into?
Our nephew Lucas Catalina. He's a huge gamer, and he's a super creative kid, and he loves science fiction and robots, but he's really into Star Wars, and he likes a lot of the Star Wars games. Like he said how like ironically, how like back in the day, like Lucas, I don't make Star Wars video. Now it's like Star Wars games are hugely successful and popular.
You can fight
Because
the
George has nothing to do with it.
You can fight. You can fight the Battle of Hoth on just about every game system. Now.
Yeah. But I guess like Lego Star Wars is huge.
those are
Lucas likes Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Those are great,
That's
yeah.
a really popular one. But his one of his favorite franchises though is Halo.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Halo is huge.
Right.
And
that's like one of the biggest, right?
It's a big one.
Yeah.
yeah. It's basically like this from what he's described. I mean, I know of it, but not
Yeah,
the
me
details.
too.
But it's like this kind of war between three futuristic factions. It's like a warlike aliens called the Covenant, and a zombie-like parasite known as the Flood, and then there's humans, and it's like who are part of this United Nations Space Command.
And they wear those like spacesuit
cool
things,
helmet.
right?
Yeah,
Space
right.
Marines are in armor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
and it's-
I
sell stuff.
actually did a comedic promo for Halo.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, where it was all improv.
Yeah, that's
and they were great, but that's as far as I got with the game.
But it's like I guess it's one of the best-selling game franchises out there. It's been made into comics, novels. I guess there's going to be a TV series.
They keep
soon at
threatening a
Showtime.
movie.
Yeah, Spielberg is supposed to be producing some movie, and the guy, I know, but it's also with Otto Blathurst, the guy who created Black Mirror.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's good.
involved in it,
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
Lucas also pointed out some horror ones that sounded interesting too. Like I guess there's this one called Alien Isolation.
Yep, that's
which is kind of like a direct sequel to the first movie.
Yeah. Alien Isolation is super cool. It's essentially a game where you have almost no weapons and you're being stalked by a xenomorph. And you hide in closets and you hide in air ducts and you go, please God, don't let him see me. and essentially you have to keep the controller super still, and because if you move, it's going to hear you. And you've got your little that beep beep beep, the thing from the
Well, that's a giveaway.
that Dallas was going through the air vent.
Right.
And
Motion detector.
Yeah, the motion detector. And in the game you're playing as I think you're like Ripley's daughter, who was
Yes,
in
yeah.
the novelization,
Right.
but never in the movies, right?
Yeah, those are great comic books.
Yeah, and then there's one level that you can get as DLC, or you can, if you bought like the special version of it, where you could actually go through
Downloadable content.
thank you. Yeah,
thank you,
You can
Gina.
you can go through the Nostromo, and it is a 1-to-1 replica of the Nostromo, and it's amazing.
That's
Because I love
awesome.
the movie Alien. And
Oh,
too.
me us too.
I want to
yeah.
do that just to walk
Oh,
around.
that's what I bought
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
That's why I bought it, because I wanted to walk through the
Oh,
Nostromo.
that's so cool.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, here's where Dallas got killed, and here's where Ash's chest exploded.
Your Disney Imagineer, that ride
Oh
in
yeah, I wish.
Orlando.
I never got to go on it.
Oh,
I never did
man.
Alien Encounter, and
yeah.
but you know that was originally an Alien branded attraction.
Yeah, well, and then also in Orlando, there's the Hollywood one where there's that
Yeah,
one.
I never got to go on
That's
that either.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
That-
That's gone too. Though.
Is that gone now,
yeah,
too?
the Great Movie Ride is also gone. Yeah.
There's
that was
a
sort of
shame.
with the Wizard of Oz. They had all
Yeah.
the Munchkins and
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
but of course,
Oh.
the good news is now that our friends at Disney have bought Fox,
oh, that's
it's
right.
true.
guess
Yeah,
guess what
Maybe.
they probably get with it, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
Is Alien.
Yeah.
So maybe they can bring Alien back.
There's another horror-themed game that Lucas likes. It's called Outlast.
Yeah.
This is like you play a journalist who's investigating a corrupt insane asylum, and
Are there
then you-
any other kind?
And then you realize that the whole place is overrun by patients, and you're trapped.
Yeah.
That's
So
neat.
that sounds really cool. I guess there's some Friday the 13th
Yep.
has been turned
Yeah,
into
yeah.
a player, and it's like 7 players, and then one of the players plays
One of
Jason.
those Jason. Yep. and
Was
you go
there an
around.
Atari one?
Yes, there was.
Way back when?
It was a Nintendo.
Nintendo.
Yeah, yeah. And you were also Jason, and you were hacking apart teenagers. But of course,
Didn't
it
that
was,
get like
it was
parents
very-
got
of
crazy
course,
about it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, all that stuff, right? Like because the game industry. We love all that stuff, right? The people that make these
Kill and shoot everything.
And so we're like, oh, we get to make a Friday the hell yeah, we're gonna make a Friday the 13th
Sure,
game, right?
sure.
And the kids will love it, and then
Yeah.
of course, who doesn't love it? But the parents.
Yeah.
And it eventually caught up to the industry with Mortal Kombat, because Mortal Kombat
right.
was. The characters were live action. They were essentially digitized, right? So they
Right.
were shot on a green screen. They animated just like that other game I was telling you about. But of course, they would rip out people's spines and blood would go shooting all over the place. And the parents saw that and said, "You're turning our children into little killers." And so this has been a long fight for just like pinball, just like rock and roll, just like comic
EC
books.
Comics,
Yep,
yeah.
EC
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's
yeah.
what drove poor EC Comics out of business was
right,
all the
yeah.
parents being paranoid
all
about
the Mary White Houses of the world.
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where the ESRB, the Electronic Standards Rating Board, came from, and that's why you have ratings on video games. But
okay,
now
right.
with streaming, there's no more storefront, and so
Yeah.
the ESRB is going away. It's like on its way
wow.
out, right? So now you can buy Outlast or any other super violent video game,
Right.
and you don't have to worry about it because it's a direct buy. You don't have to go
Right.
through a store. Nobody needs to card Jimmy, to see if he's 18 or not, and there you go. Or Lucas, sorry.
And it's interesting you said about story versus play.
Gameplay, yeah.
Gameplay, because another game that Lucas said is really popular, which isn't really a very story-driven game, but it's huge, and that's Fortnite.
Oh yeah, Fortnite is massive.
And it's kind of controversial
What's
because
that?
some people tell us about that.
So Fortnite is you're a little guy, and you can customize the heck out of him, and you can give him cool little dance
When
moves
you say
to
little
do.
guy, you
well,
mean
an
like
avatar, right?
Oh, okay.
Essentially, it's you in the world, right?
Okay.
And then you jump out of an airplane with about 50 of your friends, and you all parachute down onto this island, and scattered all over the island are all types of weapons and vehicles. So you can find jeeps and helicopters and cars and motor scooters, and you can find machine guns and machetes and whatever. And then essentially, it's essentially the what's the Hunger Games, where you
Battle Royale.
Battle Royale, yeah. And matter of fact, the mode is known as Battle Royale. That type of game is Battle Royale.
Was there a battle royale game?
Not an official one. No.
Okay.
And you go around and you murder everybody else, or you accidentally kill yourself by driving your car off a cliff and you kill yourself.
That's how there's
the breaks.
right?
And then you have to watch. And the other thing is, as the game is progressing, there's like a force field that's closing in the world. And if you go past the force field, you start to lose health and you die. And so the battlefield becomes smaller and smaller and smaller.
That's cool.
Until essentially it's two guys duking it out, and whoever
Oh,
wins,
wow.
then they win. They get all the glory. There's a big fanfare. They get extra points, and they can spend on other things.
And there
And
are,
then the government kills them.
and then and then you start all over again.
well, there are actual action figures of the
Oh, yeah.
Fortnite.
Yeah, they're lovely, too.
I remember
I gotta
going
look
to
this up.
going to Target,
Yeah,
and
there's a whole
there were
end cap.
kids going, where are Fortnite figures?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
and
No,
yeah.
I went
Kids
into
have gone insane
I
over
went
this
to the
thing.
Target toy section. I see Fortnite all over the place. Like,
Yeah.
what's Fortnite?
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a
Yeah.
video game. Old man.
Well, I was gonna say, well, Grandpa Gonis.
No, I'm an old man too, but I have kids, so I learned about it and I played it, and it's not a great game.
It's not?
That's
It's
why
not.
It sounds
it's
fun.
funny
It's
because
not-
that's
it's
what,
fun, but it's
yeah,
not, though.
Our nephew,
I don't know.
says like, is he like story?
Yeah,
And he's like,
there's
he
no
says it's
story
really
to it.
overrated. I guess there's a thing called Fortnite Rage,
Yep, yeah.
where people complain about it.
Well, if, like any
Like
anything,
nerd
right,
is
yeah,
interested in, they're going to
sure,
complain
yeah,
about it
yeah.
too,
Right.
right?
Talking
But it's
about-
just interesting though.
Environments, though, I don't really care about playability. I like walking around environments, like to walk around
Yeah.
Nostromo. There was a game a few years ago called True Crime Streets of LA,
Yeah.
virtual map of LA,
Yep.
where you could drive all the way down one boulevard or another. I mean, it wasn't infinite; it ended.
Yeah.
I don't think you could drive to like Van Nuys,
Right.
But you could drive to Hollywood. You could drive to Hollywood. Supposedly, you
Going to
were
go over the pass.
Yeah, but you're a rogue cop.
Could you get to John's Market?
That's the thing. You drive by these places and it's not Best Buy, but it looks
Yeah.
a lot like a
It's
Best
fake
Buy.
Best Buy.
And I could drive all the way to the front of my house. I could park, get out of the car.
Oh, that's awesome.
Walk to the beach, walk around the beach. I didn't care.
Okay. Wait a minute. Wait a minute.
I don't care how many criminals I shoot. I don't care. I'm not into it for that. I'm into it
Wait.
to virtually drive around LA.
You live in LA.
But it's cheaper. Gas is expensive.
The graphics are great.
But you're not in danger of being mugged. You can walk around in your house.
Well, as they say about reality, the graphics are amazing, but the story isn't that great.
You got to hang with me, my friend.
Yeah, I had almost an exact same experience where I was playing a game called LA Noire, and it's set in 1940s LA.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so at the beginning of the game, I was investigating a crime at a warehouse, and it was in Southeast LA. And the next mission was drive to the police headquarters in downtown LA. And I'm like, wait a second. A, I know where the police station is. And B, I know my way. And I didn't have to look at the map. I didn't have to look at anything. I literally just drove my way and I'm end up at the police station. I knew exactly where to go because I had driven those streets for real. And that's something that only video games can do, right? Like you can play a Spider-Man game that just came out last year that has a 1-to-1 map of New York City, right? And so if you've never been to New York before,
How about that, James?
you've never been to New York before, now you can. There's a game that was set in London. I forget what it was called, but it's 1-to-1. And if you've never been to London and then you drive around and then you go to London, you're like, oh, I know where I'm at because I've driven here before.
But you know what? I know so many people that even if they had that game, as opposed to you, they would go on their ways. And that's
a game too.
It is a game. Have you noticed how many people who previous to Waze or any kind of GPS system, knew how to drive around, knew where they were going, but
and we had
now
Thomas
everything.
Brothers.
Yeah, they trust that
Right.
more than their own friggin'
Because
minds.
it's an authority figure, right?
Yes.
They're giving over to people don't want to think. I mean, that's
Keep
that's,
going, keep
that's
going.
One
I like
of the,
this.
That's one of the arguments that you can make about video games, right? Is that you turn your brain off and you play and you lose all this time, and you're killing your life. What are you living your life for? Playing all these games. But to be honest, there's lots of good things that you can get out of games too, depending on the games you play.
Right.
Yeah. So, for example, if I play
How to kill people?
well, no, but I mean, look at the thing about video games is the interfaces of the games are nothing like what real life is. Now, granted, like in the arcades, there were games where you could hold a rifle or a pistol and shoot at stuff, but you don't really get that much at home. So the argument that, if you play these killing video games, you're going to learn to be a killer. Well, great. Are you going to be a killer if a Nintendo pad is attached to the gun? Then maybe you'll be a killer. Now, of course, that gets into the whole thing of drones and all that, which is essentially playing a video game, right?
Right.
True,
So
that's
that
true.
But a
gets a little-
zombie in like one of those games, you shoot them and they go down fast.
Sure, yeah.
Or they like 3 times, then they finally go down.
Well, I've never really shot a man, so I don't know how long it takes for them.
Well,
to
let me
go
tell
down.
you something. No, I have.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a reason why zombie killing games are so popular, or whatever, in video games. It's because they create a very short feedback loop. So think of killing a zombie. You pull the trigger, the bullet hits the zombie, his head blows up, he drops some coins, or you get some experience points, and essentially you get an attaboy, right? Good job killing that zombie. Hey, I did good. Now let me ask all of you. How many times today did somebody tell you did a good job about something?
That's true, right?
How many times this week
right.
did somebody? Oh no, I'm getting
Larry.
getting
Larry.
Larry
When
depressed.
in your life?
Yeah, when in your life?
Larry
How
gives me a
often?
lot of attaboys.
Since you were a child, like since you graduated high school, how often have people told you you're doing a good job, or
Right.
you're so great, or you're wonderful, or whatever? Right? It's not very often, sadly.
Right.
But in video games,
yeah.
this happens all the time. So part of the reason why there's some very smart books written on this topic, but part of the reason why people love kind of losing themselves in games like EverQuest or Warcraft or whatever is you're constantly getting this positive reinforcement, and it's making you feel good about yourself. And we don't get this in the real world. And if we maybe got a little bit more of this in the real world, then maybe people would want to stay in the real world.
Yeah, guys.
Well, maybe I should start playing video games.
Yeah.
Need some positive
I got
reinforcement.
1 ounce of thanks from you guys. But it's kind of similar, or not even kind of similar. It's very similar to Facebook.
Oh, very much. Yeah. Like,
totally.
love,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, God.
Yeah. Who
Did
doesn't like
anybody
it?
like my photo yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how
Let's
many-
look. 3 people liked it. Oh, but not the right people.
Yeah.
Where's my
Right.
friend? Where's Larry? How come Larry didn't like my picture?
Hey, you know what? I will tell you. For these clowns here, I always like your photo. I always like your
He
photo.
does. He does.
puts something
He
up there,
does.
Gina.
But you know what I mean, right? Like you have certain, like
Yeah.
your circle of friends. You're waiting for your wife to like it, or you're waiting for your best
Sure.
friend to like it.
There's that- there's
And
that
they're-
great
The girl
black-
from high school.
Right, yeah.
There's that great Black Mirror episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Oh,
about
wow.
that.
Yeah,
that's right,
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's creepily.
Isn't it
very
interesting
relevant.
that we were just talking about attaboys, and what's the first thing that comes out of Larry's mouth? He calls us all clowns. I think that's a reverse attaboy. What do we call
he's
that?
giving you the laughing face.
Is that what it is? Okay,
He's
okay.
ha-haing you.
By the way, you look great in that shirt.
We'll call back to another episode.
Yeah, I know.
We
Yeah,
should
it's-
make this. This is a game right here. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, what is it? What are you thinking? And how
And,
are you feeling?
Yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Listen to me.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about my collection.
Well, this.
Can you get it out of the package?
Well, this has been great.
what? Are we already stopping?
No, I'm just saying this has been great.
I know, but that's always your wind-up thing.
Well, I went ahead and a couple other. There's a couple other kind of offshoots.
And I want to know
Like-
about Gina too. I
Yeah.
want to.
Yeah.
I need
Yeah,
to
we
know
should-
about some of your favorite
Some more
games.
of your games that you like. Yeah.
Okay, my favorite.
She's got a list.
Yes.
Yes.
Read this list. Damn it.
No, I've played so many different games. I can't really pick a favorite. I love the MMORPGs.
Yeah.
Now,
Sure.
and what is that again?
Massively multiplayer online role-playing game.
I like the way that you said that. Like me, who's like, I'm like this far away from skee ball, and you're throwing these letters at me. But go ahead.
And I've actually backed an upcoming game, so I'm in on like the.
What's that
the
game?
It's called Chronicles of Illyria.
Okay. Let's give him a plug.
and it seems like it's going to be if they pull it off, one of the most unique game experiences for several reasons, because the game, it's not really set. Most games are programmed that there's going to be a guy standing here, and there's going to be this guy's going to give you a quest, and there's going to be this guy over here, and you just sort of know everybody follows the same path from the time you're born until you get to the highest level that you can get to.
Yeah.
And in this one, it's not going to be like that. The players are going to build the world. So you can be whatever you want.
Group sourced
Yeah.
content.
It's like The Sims, right? That was another
The
one.
Sims was one of them like that.
Yeah, they're calling it a meow.
What's
meow? What does the meow stand for?
It's
Oh, you didn't know that, huh?
I got to learn something.
All right, Mr. Expert over there.
These kids and their terms.
It's multiplayer, evolving online
World.
Nice.
Huh,
Yeah.
nice.
Meow. I like
Now,
that.
how do you become like? I know you've done beta testing before. Like, how do you become a beta tester? How do you
Like what I just did,
become
where I'm a backer? I'm
how
gonna
do
be a beta
But how do you
tester.
get into all that? How do you do that? I mean, do people
give them some money.
announce? That people announce.
How do you
that
get
they're gonna
anyone
have
to do
these
anything,
things, and then you
Sean?
just kinda-
Yeah. I mean, I think this was a Kickstarter at first.
Okay.
Have you beta tested things where you didn't have to pay? Where like because they know
World
that
of
you're
Warcraft.
this. Oh, really?
Not
Okay.
not because anybody knew I was something. A
just
coworker knew somebody who worked at Blizzard.
Oh, I
so
see, okay.
I got to get in on it.
That's cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I mean, this one just seems really cool because everything is different, and the most different thing is that your character will live and grow old and die, and then your
Sounds
soul,
great.
Your soul will then your soul.
I think
will
I'm
then
living
be-
that game.
Then your soul will go into your heir, like your kid or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And that's how they don't have a subscription
Tough
fee.
luck, Mr. Weinhold.
And they don't have a
say goodbye to your
subscription
wife.
fee. It's going to be
She's gonna be living multiple lives online.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that kind of stuff, that's a whole other type of game. Like, was it with Farmville?
Farmville,
yeah.
Farmville, okay. And what was that? Like,
Well,
'cause-
that was more like I'm making a cute little farm, and by the way, can you click my thing to help me? And then pretty soon you start asking everybody to click, and then everybody gets tired of asking you to click, and then you lose all your friends because you're embarrassed to like ask them to help you.
That sounds horrible.
Well, it was. It is, and that's why you don't see those games as much anymore.
Okay.
Right? That's why they're not as popular, because there's a responsible way to make these games and an irresponsible way to make them. And Farmville, unfortunately, was a little too exploitive to the player.
Is that
Right?
something like
Sounds
on
terrible.
Facebook that
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
you
yeah.
get a freaking request from
Yeah,
somebody,
yeah.
some friend you never heard of, and like they want you to give them a freaking
Yep.
cantaloupe or something?
Exactly.
Or like-
And it's that
Like, what the
response
fuck?
that why you don't
Yeah,
see those
like,
anymore.
Who are you? What are
Okay.
you doing?
So this is a question for both of you.
Okay.
Okay. Knowing me and my limited understanding and experience
Patience.
and patience when it comes to these games. But you know what I like, you know, my tastes.
Right.
So what would be a good like entry level game for me?
Are you talking about video or tabletop?
Let's do video because I feel like I'm a little more apt to go the tabletop.
Okay.
But the video game is to me is just it's intimidating. So is there any game that like maybe horror or science fiction, not too complicated? Here's a couple other things that I don't like. I don't want to play with 50 players. I don't want to know 50 people, let alone play a game with them. I just want to play it by myself with me.
I have a recommendation, but I want you to go first.
You don't
I
got
have
anything?
No recommendation.
Oh, okay.
You got
yeah.
nothing?
So-
What about this Portal game you were talking about?
So Portal is good.
It's like a puzzle
It's
game.
funny puzzle-based game.
Okay.
And in fact, in Portal 2, there's a cool character who Stephen Merchant
Yep.
voies.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
it's great.
Okay, I
And
like
that's
this.
fun. That's
I
fun.
like
That
this.
is
This
a good.
sounds
That's
good.
a good
That's what this
recommendation.
guy's from.
Okay.
Yeah, she's
Is
got
that
the
Stephen
robot
Merchant?
from. No,
No.
it's one of the 2 multiplayer robots that you
Yeah.
have.
I like the design
Yeah,
already. So
it's
I'm already
really
I'm
cool.
halfway there.
So my recommendation for you, but you have to go back a system or so. So you'd probably
That's
have to
fine.
get like a
I'll do that.
PlayStation 3.
Okay.
So it's a little cheaper.
PlayStation 3.
If I were you, I would buy a game called Dead Space.
I've heard of this.
So Dead Space is kind of like Aliens.
Okay.
But you're an astronaut or a space guy. You end up on this space station that's been overrun by what eventually ends up being kind of this cult, supernatural cult, and all the humans, their bodies have kind of morphed into things that look kind of like the Thing. So there are all these horrible, gross those monsters, and
I
then
like this.
and then you have your weapons, which primarily the gameplay is you're using like engineering tools to cut apart the monster. So the only way you can kill them is like cut off their arms and their legs. And
Oh,
their
that's
head.
cool.
And
I like
so
this.
it's you're murdering a bunch of monsters, but it's genuinely scary. It's a single player game only, so there's no multiplayer. You don't have to
Great,
make friends. And it has a really good story. And then there's a good sequel and a mediocre third game.
I saw a movie.
There's animated movies. There's
that was
novels.
pretty
there's-
fun.
Yeah, the movies
wow.
are
Yeah.
cool. The animated movies are cool. Yeah, it's got a whole transmedia world that you could get into if you're into it. But like I said, it's not super hard to play.
Okay, great.
It's super violent.
Excellent.
And it's got monsters and it's scary. There's actually genuinely scary moments in it.
This sounds perfect.
Is it only a console game?
I believe you might be able to play it on PC, but
Okay.
but I would suggest playing it on either
Do it at console.
PlayStation. Yeah, do it on
Find a
console.
console.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
All
a
right,
much
great.
better console experience.
When you look at James just described walking around, virtually walking around a city he lives in.
Right.
That's about the extent of my
All right. So,
gameplay interest.
Gina, do you have any recommendations for him?
No, you go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll talk all night if I have to. So for James, I would recommend. So there's a genre of games that's kind of risen in the past 5 or 6 years that they kind of jokingly call walking simulators. So there's not a lot of gameplay. Like you don't need to have very good dexterity skills. They're more about using the
Just shoes,
environment.
right?
Well, no, you're using the environment to tell a story. So a really good one is a game called Gone Home. Gone Home is about a girl who comes home from college. She's in the Pacific Northwest. She comes home and her whole family is gone from her house. And she's like, well, what happened to everybody? And so as you go around the house and you search everything in the house and you can turn on lights and record players and read letters and things like that, you start to figure out what happened to your family.
It's like a mystery that you're solving.
Yeah, kind of a mystery, yeah.
Almost like an escape room kind
A
of
little bit,
thing.
but it's less puzzly
Less
and more
puzzly, okay.
just discovery.
Okay.
Right? So it's very, the pace is very slow. It's not like boom, 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 no explosions, no shooting. I think you maybe manipulate a few objects, but it's very simple to play.
And you get to play a girl. So it's perfect.
That's something.
Yeah.
Cool.
Great.
All right, Larry.
Like those, I liked Abduction. Did you play that?
yeah,
What's
I
that
haven't
one?
played
What's that
but
one?
That's I've heard it's good.
Yeah, it's.
And there's other horror ones as well. The horror genre is also very popular in this.
Yeah,
type
this
of,
one isn't really horror.
Yeah.
but
It's more
it's
sci-fi,
like it's
right?
like that where you have to solve a mystery, and this one is quite puzzly actually.
Right, okay,
so.
right.
But it's someone is abducted and you got to figure out what happens, or
Yeah, like the whole town is gone. You're the only one there.
I like
Ooh,
stuff
that's
like
cool.
that.
Yeah,
I
so
do
you
like
You
that.
have to figure out what happened.
Is there a
and-
supernatural, extra normal, whatever you would call it, element to it, or
Or sci-fi-ish. Or,
yeah?
ish? Yeah.
It's like a Twilight-
Okay, yeah. You don't want to.
Twilight
It's
Zone
not.
type.
I don't want
You want to
say
spoil
anything
it.
in case,
Yeah.
in
Okay.
case you do it.
Okay. All right. Now,
As
how
a
about
Go-
Larry?
Well, as a Godzilla fan, I like to do like with big monsters wrecking big buildings and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that'd be what I'd be into too.
Well, so there's several. I mean, that's a very popular genre in video games. You can start with the old arcade classic Rampage. You can.
That's what the
then-
movie was based on.
Right,
Yeah.
the movie was
Right.
based on. You can play one of my favorites of that genre, but it's a 2-player game. It's called War of the Monsters, and it's a PlayStation 1 game. So it's visually it's not up to date. It's a little cruder. But I've also heard that there is going to be. Pretty soon, I think there's going to be something based on a new Godzilla movie.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
usually Japan pretty much makes a Godzilla game every year. Now you can't always buy them in the U.S., but they every so often they'll release one, and they're varying levels of good and bad, but they allow you to stomp around and blow up stuff.
That's all I care about.
yeah. What's a good one? Because that would be another one I think I would like to play.
to blow up stuff.
Or like to fight another monster,
another monster.
and it has to be Godzilla.
Has
I don't
to be
want
Godzilla.
like a
You don't want a
Godzilla-esque
fake
monster.
Godzilla, right.
I want Godzilla.
Destroy All Monsters.
License.
Yeah, Destroy All
For
Monsters
GameCube back in the day.
Yep, yeah. That
And
was
one of the great things about the Godzilla games is that more often than not, you can have like Showa era Godzilla versus the Heisei era Godzilla.
Yep.
And they're pretty
Godzilla.
accurate to the
Very,
monster.
very.
Matter of fact, in one of the more recent, I want to say it's maybe about 6 or 7 years old, though, there was like one version that you actually saw the zipper on the back of the.
Oh, that's great.
But they're fighting games. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
you basically have to be into one-on-one fighting games to really get
Right.
Yeah,
fuck out of those.
sometimes they have AI modes, but the AI is variable quality, right? It's always better to play against a human in those games.
And then Sean, of course.
I'll stick with Tempest. I can play Tempest.
When I was in Vegas once, because I was doing stand up at the MGM Grand and I don't gamble, and I spent the entire time playing Tetris.
Yeah.
Love that fucking game.
Still a great game.
There is a game though, like it's like a little offshoot, but in the early '90s, a game that Gina and I discovered that I really liked. This was kind of like a combination of a board game, but also like a interactive video. And this was Atmosphere.
Oh yeah, that's also known as Nightmare.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. And that's
it's Atmosphere, FEAR.
yeah. It's a VHS game.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It was cool.
Oh yeah, it was yes.
I mean, at the time, it was cool.
Did you say VHS game?
Yeah,
Yeah, it
VHS
was.
game.
You put the VHS
Yeah.
play, and it was a guy, the gatekeeper, and he would tell you what to do, and you're trying to beat him, and you're trying to get these little keystones.
Right. So
and
in the
you're timed. You
Yeah.
have exactly
The
like an
cake-
hour.
and,
to
Yeah.
finish.
and essentially this guy who looks kind of like the Emperor from Star
Yeah.
Wars.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
just yells at you the whole time and
Yeah.
calls you an idiot and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah.
There's a whole really cool genre of these VHS games from the late 80s, early
Yeah.
90s. There's a Star Wars one where it was like the first time James Earl Jones reprised his role as Darth
right,
Vader.
right.
And it was a pretty good one. You're running like Luke and an R2 unit around you trying to get Death Star plans. There was a fantastic Star Trek one where a Klingon was the guy yelling at you.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. That's,
Well,
I want that one.
There's one really frustrating one that we have, and it's based on the show 24.
Oh, yeah, right,
And it's
right.
it's Kiefer Sutherland as Jack Bauer,
Yeah.
and like he would come on the screen, or he would come the voice and be like, okay, and I have to do this, and it's so hard. It was
Yeah,
like you're
the game
tracking
wasn't that
guy.
great, but-
No, but like it was every once in a while, if you'd screw up, you're like, you idiot, you've caused a terrorist. The bomb's been released and the LA's destroyed. Like you're like, it was
yeah,
so funny.
there's a lot of humiliation in those games.
But I mean, along those lines, there was a Godfather game where Brando reprised Don Corleone,
yeah.
and
Really?
a James Bond game where Sean Connery
Yep.
came back.
Yeah,
to James
and
Bond.
Are you kidding me?
And,
Commercial
So what this is
Yeah.
like in the
Scarface
80s?
with Pacino. No, these were 90s games. Yeah.
VHS ones or
No,
No,
these were-
video
these
games.
were
Video
video
games.
games in the
Video
90s.
games, okay.
Wow.
There was kind of a
Wow.
big renaissance, like kind
And now
of in
there's some like newer
2000s or
versions
so.
of that. Now there are there's DVDs instead of
Well, the games
VHS.
are usually all on. Well, there's not. The irony is that genre is not really made a resurgence yet. I give it another.
right.
I give it another few years. The tech is there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
they
the-
should. Like
I
the
think it's just
atmosphere
the-
should come back again. Like
It's just
yeah.
I've talked to the guys that made Atmosphere. I do this podcast that's called Biography of a Board Game, or it's a segment.
Whoa.
Sorry, it's another. I'm plugging another
Did you
podcast.
just mention another podcast?
Yes, but it's only adjacent to what you guys.
Okay,
do.
that's cool.
all right.
Because the cool thing about I know Atmosphere was a couple different versions. The one we have is called Atmosphere of the Harbingers.
Right, yep.
And it's an Australian game.
Right, yeah,
It's a big
the-
Atmosphere of the Harbingers. It's like
Yeah.
it's like this totally
A couple of
Australian.
cowboys is the name
Yeah.
of the guys that made that. Yeah, they did a bunch of them. They did like a mummy one and a witch one and a vampire
Oh,
one.
man,
There was
let's
a
get
whole
all of those.
series
Wow.
of
I
those
really like that.
Atmosphere
Wow.
games. Yeah, and I personally I feel like the genre is due for a comeback.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's just that the production to make them, like the actual film the live person part,
Yeah, yeah.
is a little bit more intensive than most people are willing.
They should do it
like,
now with like holograms or
Oh.
something. We could do something really cool.
Eventually,
you know?
I think we'll eventually get there with holograms.
Yeah. So, I mean, all these different phases of gaming that we've talked about, like we're in 2019.
Right.
What do you think is going to, you anticipate to be the next game changer, the next kind of level of, really advanced play?
VR, you know.
Yeah,
well,
but what,
The holodeck.
Well,
Yeah.
I just spent a year making a VR game. It was a Terminator licensed game. You can go play it down at the Irvine Spectrum.
Cool.
Wow.
You put on a VR helmet and a backpack, and you get a gun, and then we essentially fly you out to like a destroyed LA, and you fight off Terminators.
Wow.
And
That's
it's a
cool.
lot of fun and super cool, and you get to see what your high score is and all that, and you can actually map your face onto the robot. So you're
Wow.
actually playing as the robot, but you have to have your face on it so you can tell who the hell everybody is. It's kind of like The Void. You guys know what The Void is? The Void is
Yeah.
a Star Wars version of this that you can play at Disney, downtown Disney. Ours is is similar. Ours has better graphics and better gameplay. But anyway, so I spent a year doing that. So VR, for me, my personal belief is VR is great for a destination. I don't think it's going to really stay in the home. Like people have home units and stuff, but the
Right.
space that it takes to play a VR game and the just even setting it up, I think is still kind of a barrier to entry for a lot of players. And plus, I have a personal belief that people don't like to look like idiots when they're playing a game. And when you put on that helmet, you're flailing around. Even if you're by yourself, you kind of feel like you're stupid.
A little self-conscious.
Yeah. But if you're in a public setting, it's kind of like karaoke. Like doing karaoke at home is a little weird, but doing it in public at a bar, it's like everybody else is doing it, so I'll do it too. Right. So that's my own personal feeling about VR. So I'm more interested in seeing VR in settings like theme parks and malls and things. Like you can go to the Galleria over here and play the Void and do the Star Wars thing. You don't have to go down to Anaheim. But I think we'll start seeing more of that, kind of like living hand in hand with either theme parks or arcades. And I mean, arcades are making a bit of a comeback, you know?
Yeah,
we're seeing like these barcades that are coming back.
Even seems like even board games in a way.
Oh, well, board games are huge now.
Back now again. It's interesting.
We're in a golden age of board games. Like there are board gaming cafes. There's a place called Game House over in Glendale that you can go pay $5 and spend the whole day just playing board games.
Yeah, we went there actually for a friend's birthday.
Yeah,
it was good, right?
Yeah,
and there's good food, and they have great pie. There's another place down in Burbank called Geeky Teas, and they do a similar thing. They're like a tea house, but they have games. So this is like
it's really interesting because it's like back to like physical.
People want to
and
reconnect.
interacting with face to face and doing things with physical objects.
We spent a lot of time on our devices, and now we want to interact with people again.
Yeah.
How about edible games?
You
mentioned pie.
Yeah,
is there a game you can play with pie?
Well,
or?
there's not pie,
in the
but
face?
there is
Steaks?
pie in the face, right? Yeah, there's a game where you have a little catapult and you put shaving cream on it, and it's like Russian roulette. And you turn the knob, and if you hit the wrong thing, you get hit in the face with a pie.
Shaving cream?
Yeah, you could make it whipped cream if you want.
Okay.
Yeah,
or you can make it a custard pie. Although the
Mashed
hand is
potatoes.
Yeah, you could do mashed potatoes, sure.
And then if you already have gravy in your mouth,
Right, then you're halfway there. You take a swig of gravy and then crank the thing.
I will help you with this game.
Okay, all right. We'll make the gravy
Yeah.
game. So yeah, there's like there have been games where the pieces are made out of chocolate, and so you eat them at the end of the game. So there's things. It's always that kind of thing is always
There's
existed.
nothing new.
And also just-
Every time I think I've come up with something new.
It's just a new way to present it, right?
Sure.
That's like I mean, you know, we there's been so much culture and pop culture, and you know, there is nothing new. But my personal philosophy as a game designer is you put all this stuff in I call it my brain blender, and I grind it all up like Jamba Juice, and then I create something out of it, and hopefully the thing that I've created is still delicious, but B, it's something that people go,
Like
oh,
fresh and
I never
different.
thought about putting those things
I
together
did.
before.
Right.
Infinite diversity and infinite combinations. Star Trek?
Yes.
Anyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and also that
I'll go.
I
first.
thought you were talking about something else when you said I did.
Yeah, I was like, well, you do?
No, it's a game I'm working on right now.
I knew what you were talking
And
about.
I thank you, Larry.
You don't want to know what the
But
playing pieces
if we're
are.
talking about that other game, I always win.
But also back to the computer technologies, like I see commercials for new games coming out, and I say, "Oh, what's that movie?" I'm like, "Oh my god, that's a fucking video game! It looks so fucking good. Like,
yeah,
it looks.
it
I
looks
mean,
so real,
the graphic is going to be to the point where it's going to look like
Well, it does.
real.
It
yeah,
does look
I mean,
like I walk by Madden, like the sports games, and I have to do a double take. I'm
it's
like,
like-
is that a live broadcast or is
it's
that a video game?
insane. Yeah, it's crazy.
Crazy.
Well, that's the thing, though. Like the new hot mechanism in gaming is story. Which is ironic, right?
Right,
Remember
right.
we talked
Yeah,
about
we've
there
come
was this
full circle.
this full circle again. It really just keeps going back and forth, right? It keeps going in a circle. And so right now we're in a place where we've kind of mastered technology to a certain extent. And so now we get to play with the form. And that's always for me, my money, that's always the best time, because now you can take risks and you can make things not look realistic. You can start making things look like look at what's going on with the Spider-Man movie, right? Like they've made how many of those Spider-Man movies, they're not interested in making it look real anymore. They want it to look like the comic book, right?
Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, into the Spider-Verse,
which
right?
is so amazing.
Yeah, and video games, it's the same thing. They get to a point where there's a level of competency and people get confident, oh, we can make it look like the real world. Well, let's not make it look like the real world anymore.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
what fun is that?
So now is the time for Spielberg to produce the $300 million version motion picture of Pong.
Well, they are doing. I mean, they've done like Battleship, and they've done
Yeah.
Clue, and
Pac-Man,
yeah.
right? Didn't they do
they
a
did
Pac-Man movie?
Pixels.
Super Mario Brothers.
Pixels, that's
Yes,
right.
Although
Super
the
Mario.
movies based on video games or board games don't tend to do very well critically.
yeah.
For the most
Yeah,
part.
that's
no.
right.
For the most
because
part.
what is the thing that you do when you play a video game?
you play.
You play it, right?
Yeah.
You don't just watch.
Right,
And so it
right.
requires a level of engagement, and that's where it creates what we call a narrative. And the narrative is the story of your play. There's two stories in a video game. One is the story I write for you, which could be about space aliens invading Earth, blah, blah, blah. And then the story that you create, which is, hey, I was this guy in the middle of this invasion, and I ran and hid over here, and I shot some aliens, and then I ran and rescued my friends, and then I jumped in a Jeep and drove around, and a spaceship chased me, blah, blah, blah. And so these two parallel stories happen, but the more engaging one, just like we talked about D&D, is the narrative because it's a story of you.
Because movie going is a passive thing.
It's
You
a
sit
passive activity.
and you let it wash over you, and you let
You don't have to think.
Right, exactly.
But in video games, you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we've covered it. This is
Good.
this is very
Good
comprehensive here.
historical,
Yeah.
yeah.
Just getting started.
And night, of course. Well, we'll have you back. We'll do another chapter of this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But are there any games like past or present, board games, video games, anything that we haven't discussed? That there's something that maybe you want to.
Well,
Touch on.
Did I ever tell you guys that one of my first temp jobs here in LA was a game tester?
Ooh, where
for,
at?
for Sony Interactive, Sony ImageSoft, it was called back
Awesome.
then. And I couldn't believe I was getting paid to play games all day. And it was QA, and you were expected to find bugs and repeat them. But for like hours on end, you're sitting there just playing the same game.
So
And
what were some of the games that you played?
well, it was Johnny Mnemonic, the video game,
Really?
Yeah, based
Wow.
on the movie.
based on the movie, because it was Sony, and I guess that was a Columbia movie.
Terrible
Right.
movie.
Good book.
Not a great video game either. But they
Imagine that.
I tested a PlayStation, the first PlayStation, and it was a game called Warhawk. It was a flying game. That was more fun than anything else.
That's a good one.
I tested a hockey game that I spoke with Scott about earlier that I think, Scott, you might have...
Yeah. So early on in my career, one of the first companies that I worked for was Sony, but I worked for I helped start the office down in San Diego, and I was working on a game called National Hockey Night. And so that might have been a game that you tested.
That's so
Wow.
funny.
Yeah, I did a lot of sports games at the beginning, and that's why I actually left the company, because my boss kept saying, hey, I want to make this fantasy game. And I said, John, when are we going to make this fantasy game? And he goes, well, the technology's still a few years off. And so I said, I can't do sports games anymore. I'll go insane. I left, and that game that they ended up making was EverQuest.
Oh, man.
oh, wow.
And I tested a side-scrolling game based on Spawn, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
was when I realized I did not like side-scrolling games.
Now, what's that?
Yeah.
Side-scrolling?
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit like I guess it's like Super Mario Brothers,
Yeah.
right? Where it's
Yeah,
just it's
absolutely.
a parallel. It's like panning left to right constantly, and it keeps moving that way.
Right,
and it was
right.
just really deadly boring to me. I like the games where you move forward instead.
Right.
Right,
Well,
right.
that was at a time where the industry was kind of falling out of love with that. So that seems like a bit of a tail end game, because all the games were 3D at this point, right? People
Yeah.
were much more interested in 3D worlds and moving the camera around and treating it as this real physical space.
And consoles like PlayStation were just coming in
Yep.
and
Yeah.
introducing that technology.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't work at a video game place like James did. And, maybe I'm not the biggest video guy. Again, I like my games tactile. I like physical games. And so I have this great Godzilla game from Mattel from 1978. And it's
brought it with you, too. too. It's beautiful.
I did.
It is a beauty.
It is beautiful.
Well, careful.
This is not a little video game. This is a physical thing where you're a little rocket ship and you spin the little dial, and the game, it's like a thick plastic about 3 inches deep, and what happens is you spin the little spinner, and then you have to move your little rocket ship so many places, and you have to do it in such a way that Godzilla doesn't pop out and eat your spaceship.
So
See, now that's a game that I can get behind.
Yeah.
That's one where I'm like,
And-
look, I know what's happening. I know what the risks are.
Yes.
So is Godzilla floating in
In
space?
space.
Yeah, he's just
yes, and
hanging.
he pops
So-
out of nowhere
Is he
in
space
space.
Has he ever
Is
been
he-
in space before?
And what?
Yes,
Yes,
yes, he has.
Oh,
Maybe if
okay.
you watch the movie, sir, you'd understand he's been in
I
space.
saw the first one.
But what's great about this is, I've actually played this game. Don't touch it. I've actually played this game with my daughter, and we've had a really good time together playing this game.
And
so
nobody's lost a finger.
And no one's lost. No, but it's really.
You could
cool.
sharpen
See,
those.
see,
You could put a
Godzilla
razor blade
down
in there.
and it's like oh. See,
What if you made spaceships out of little pieces of cheese and then you put a knife in its mouth?
because then cheese would get in Godzilla's mouth.
But then you could have cheese.
No,
it would cut
no.
cheese. I'm just trying to work food into this.
Anyway, it's got great
cool. That's
graphics,
cool.
and
It's wonderful.
And the
It's
box,
lovely.
and the box is beautiful.
What year
It
is it
is.
from?
And
Really
this
cool.
this is actually this is
70s?
it's actually from 1978.
Ah,
but
okay.
what's funny is you had mentioned the Alien. You know, and the funny thing is in 1979 there was an Alien game, and the funny thing about this game, it was similar to these other board games where the graphics on the board aren't that great, but on the box it had a photo of this astronauts going into the derelict spaceship, but because it was a rated R movie, what they did is instead of putting a picture of the real monster, they put a picture of the toy alien on the box cover next to the astronauts. So it's like
funny.
it's the toy alien against the astronauts, not the actual alien from the movie.
Kind of like you're getting two toys.
Exactly.
Wow. That's great. You got any more? You must have a bunch.
Well, the only other one that I have and has a great story. There's actually a Creature Features board game from 1975.
I remember that. Yeah.
And there's
I
a
remember.
yes.
Yeah.
Is that a fun game to play? It's a trivia game,
It
right?
is, and it's a fun game because one of my fondest memories of Shawn Sheridan is we actually played this game together.
Oh yeah, that's
yes,
right.
and it was like
It wasn't
Shawn.
called Creature Features though. was
Well, it was like Sean, Ernie, or your next door neighbor and myself, and we were playing this game. It was like a trivia game, and Sean was all
Oh yeah,
excited.
I know why he loves the memory of this so much.
He won.
Yeah. it was just called the science fiction and horror game
Yeah.
or something.
What's funny
yeah.
is that I am thinking for like this deeper meaning of why he's going to explain why he loves this thing.
Yeah, he
And it's
still
just he
remembers
won.
that. Like
won.
he just loves to rub that in. Like he won this
Wow.
game.
Okay.
But yeah, it was a trivia game that it was like horror, sci-fi, and TV and movies and books and everything. And I was good at it. And like then Larry came along and beat me.
Yeah, came in first, and out of the three of us, and I think, did you come in second? Oh no, you didn't come in second. You came in third.
He remembers that. He remembers like it was
Hey,
yesterday.
Sean, remember Dr. Brainiac's lab?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
pilot that
Yeah,
that I produced.
Yeah, it was a game
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
And I was a contestant.
That's right. And Larry was
and
too.
Larry was a
wait,
contestant
did
too.
Larry win though?
I think I won
that's
that.
right. I think you're right.
I think I totally schooled him
And
too.
you know what's funny? This is really interesting because if you guys recall, there was a flaw in the game.
As he keeps saying.
No.
Yeah.
There was.
And yet I still won.
Well, because there was a flaw in the game.
Oh, you're going to
Yes.
say because of the flaw,
Yes,
I
yes.
won. No,
yes,
no,
yes,
that's
it
not
was.
true. Because
'Cause you
I
just-
answered the questions correctly.
And
And I didn't have to get a
okay, do you remember
get it on the second try kind of a
Roy
thing.
Biddy?
Yeah, but that was
Roy
one
Biddy?
thing.
That was
That was one question out of the whole thing.
We'll have
I'm
to,
just-
we'll
It's
have
not
to
my fault that I
somehow-
answered more correct questions than you did. That's how games work.
well. You know what? Maybe when Sean produces that game again, maybe we can go at it again.
This was an independently made pilot we made back in the 90s. That we should
put that up.
put on
that up.
YouTube
Put that
or
up.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll
you
try to
should do
get
that.
that on there because it was a fun.
Maybe
it was like-
Patreon someday.
Yeah, and everyone can see the design flaw.
everybody
in the
can see
game.
Larry
yeah.
lose.
And we could, you could see, just schooled him.
No,
just
see, if I could recall, when you got an answer wrong, see, you're supposed to get points taken away, but not on this game.
Yeah, and
you could
yet
just
I
press
still
your
won.
buzzer. You could just press your buzzer and say anything.
even with flawed rules, I still managed to beat the shit out of you.
That's right.
Well, that's okay.
Schooled you.
If you have a game with flawed rules, you can always hire me, and I will help you redesign your game.
That's right.
There you go. I'll see. Look at that.
The video online player video version
Yeah.
of Dr. Brainiac's Lab.
or you make
Yeah, we
or
could-
make an app.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's right.
now
Yeah.
this is great. Now, Sean, is there a game that you like or something that you want
Actually,
to
well,
discuss?
we were talking about like how movies of video games usually aren't that good. But one game that, the movie was made first, but then a game was made after it, we really like, which is Zathura.
Oh,
Zathura.
Yeah.
Zathura is
Well, I
really
love that
John
movie.
Favreau
Yeah, it's a great
directed.
movie.
I'm not sure how he knows we love it because we've never taken it out because I don't want to ruin it.
well, we took it out and looked at it, but
But
it's like
just gorgeous, the
yeah,
packaging.
they made the actual game just like the
With the
game
little
in the
wind-up
the
and all
film.
that?
Yeah, it's
No.
really
No.
cool.
No,
yeah,
it's actually not.
But
Oh,
it's
it's
close.
not
I mean,
that?
it's
Oh,
close.
okay.
So it's like
How many more
it's
lies
close
are you
to-
going to spout, Sheridan?
Zathura was a huge influence on one of my own board games, which is called Ray Guns and Rocketships. And one of the design, so the there's 4 races, Planeteer factions, I call them, in the game, and one of them are called the Zard, and they are lizard men, and they are unofficially based on the Zorgons from
Right.
Zathura.
Do you want us to cut that out?
No, it's okay. It's my homage. I love that
There you
movie,
go.
and I
But there was
homaged
like
it.
other like later, more modern board games that were much more interactive, like Cranium. Cranium is a fun game.
Yeah,
'cause
there was a big boom in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s of trivia games and party games. And,
Right.
and we're kind of back around to that. Now, the form of them are very different. They're not so much trivia. They're not so much, charade type games. But
Right.
there are other games like Code Names is a really popular party game. My own Pantone the Game is a party game. There's a whole bunch. Werewolf is a great game for large groups.
Key Party. That's always a good one.
Party, yeah, that's a different type of
What is
party.
Pictionary?
Yeah, Pictionary, right? Yeah, there's Telestrations, which is a variant on Pictionary. But yeah, there's all types of party games. It's a great.
it does seem
market.
like every other aspect of pop culture, movies, TV. There's more of everything now.
Yep,
Like
yeah.
gaming is the same way. Like board games or online games, video game. Like it's
because it's a lot easier to
tons.
just make them, right? Like it's
Yeah.
the barrier of entry, which used to be a lot of money and a lot of people and access to technology. Most of those barriers have gone away. You could, if you wanted to make a board game, you could make it. You could send off your JPEGs to a company like Print and Play or Game Crafter, and within 3 to 4 weeks, you would have what looks like a published game, if depending on the quality, of course, game that you could play with your friends. And there doesn't need to be more than one of that game that ever exists.
Right.
Or with a video game, there are tools you can go online, and you want to make an adventure game. There's tools to make an adventure game. You want to make a side-scrolling platformer, you can make a side-scrolling platform. If you want to make a 3D action game, you can make a 3D action game. They're all there, and most of them are free.
the Monster Party board game.
There you go. Well, once again, I'm available
But
for
you know
hire.
what?
It's
If-
gotta
if
be a
we
drinking
do-
game.
If we
Yeah,
do,
yeah.
but it's got to have
Little
cool
statue,
figures.
yeah,
Yes,
sure.
you know,
Yeah,
none
right,
of this
right.
little
Well,
marble
no,
thing.
We'll be all 3-dimensional, but Larry's will be just like a plastic, like thin.
No, Larry.
In a box.
Larry
Unpainted.
should be in a package. Like Larry is inside a package.
How about encased in like see-through plastic?
There you go.
That's what I
You
mean.
know, yeah.
It looks
I
like
like
you're
that.
a toy inside a.
Or
thing.
maybe the game is you guys are trying to rescue Larry out of his plastic.
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't.
but he wouldn't want to escape.
Yeah, right.
So it's the-
That's how he
It's
loses.
the tension between.
Yeah, if we open him up, the game's over.
It's
like
a
that.
Pop-O-Matic and Larry's in the middle.
Oh, that's great.
Trying to outrun the dice. Yeah.
No, but do you guys find that with trivia games that you sort of have to play with the right group because
Oh, sure.
like no
Yeah.
one will play Silver Screen Trivial Pursuit with me because they know they're going to lose.
Well,
There's
I,
certain-
I got Sean a horror trivia
Oh, yeah.
game for Christmas.
Yes, it's a horror trivia game with like a little.
So we'll
Card
give you
game
some
thing or
pot
something.
Matt, and maybe you'll get through the
Yeah,
Mushrooms.
but we could but horror trivia we could do. We should
You don't-
play that.
we could do it,
You
yeah.
don't
Yes.
need to have any hallucinogenic.
You speak for
stuff.
yourself.
I know, and
Hey,
you-
listen,
and
listen, Granddad.
okay, look, I'm talking to Sean here.
We're
Sean,
turning on and tuning out.
I'd love to
Tuning
play that
you out.
game,
Yeah.
and I'm sure
And I'll win.
Yes, yeah, but I'll try my best. But I'm sure that you'll come really. You'll.
Oh, he'll beat
you-
your ass.
yes.
If it's anything, if we go beyond like Hammer horror, you're fucking done for. He'll school you.
Well, we'll see. Like I said, he did win that game way back then.
But it was probably like old guys are like, who was in King Kong? And like that kind of shit.
Well,
If he gets into like Dario Argento, you're fucking
That's true.
done, man.
well,
then I will school
Yeah.
him.
well, this has been great.
No, we're not done yet. Hey, listen, asshole. I haven't had my turn yet.
Sorry,
I'm not losing this
I'm
game
sorry,
because
right.
you're calling
You're
time.
absolutely right. And Matt,
You
what,
are like the physical personification of error.
so Matt, what
Jesus
games do you?
Okay,
Let-
first of all, here's my least favorite ones. This was a kind of a wave that was happening was the LCD games.
Oh, right.
And they would
Little
sell
tiger
them.
games,
yeah, and they were like, and you'd have a Spider-Man or Ultraman or whatever character they wanted to put in, and you'd, fight, and they're like the LCD, you'd have 4 moves.
And Matt, how old were you when you played these?
37.
Yeah, those games are not for you.
Oh,
That's the thing. You have to be 8 to enjoy those.
yeah. I think I got it on the tail end, and I didn't realize. I was
Right.
expecting something more.
Yeah, no, I mean
Even kids, I could see getting bored of that.
Well, sure, yeah. And what would happen is that kids would buy them or get them as gifts, and then they'd pass them on to their younger siblings. And then meanwhile, the kids would graduate to consoles and play that, right? And it's just kind of a natural evolution of the industry is that people are always handing down their systems to
Right.
their younger siblings. But then it gets to the point, of course, where it's nostalgia, right? So now we're all us older guys and we're like, oh my God, I never had that Vectrex when I was a kid and I need to have that now. And I'm making so much money, I can now buy it on eBay for 3 times what it was worth, Or,
Well, okay, so here's the example of that. There was a Migo phaser battle game.
don't get me started.
Do you remember that one?
You have the commercial for that.
And I'm telling you, my friend, and it was really expensive when it came out. It was like $64 or something, which might as well have been
1978.
Yeah, it was like $300, And my friend had it because he was an only child, and his parents just dumped money on him, right? But he had it, and I fucking love this thing.
And you didn't take it from him?
And yeah, it was hard to get under my shirt. But this thing was cool because it had like a little star field.
Yeah, I remember.
And then there was like this.
Yeah, they made a Star Wars version of it.
Yeah. There was a controller that had like this
yeah.
plexiglass piece that would go down the screen with a line, and then when you would line up that line with the alien spaceships and you press fire, they would do this blow up kind of thing. But according to some of the research I did, I guess they weren't really made that well. And like after 3 games, it would fall apart. At least one aspect of the game would stop working.
Right.
But still, I would love to have that now. And I wouldn't even play it. I would just like every once in a while light the thing up and
put your hands
turn it
on
on and just, look at it. But I would love to have that now. And it's just pure nostalgia.
Sure, yeah,
But
of
a terrible game.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what a lot of those were.
Yeah.
Right? They were not meant to last. They
Right.
were.
No.
They were. They didn't realize that there were going to be guys like us in the future that wanted to recapture and rebuy our childhood.
Yeah.
Over and
how
over
dare
again.
you?
And then, of course, there were other people that realized that there are idiots like us out there, and they would charge, outrageous amounts of money for us to buy them, and of course, we would buy it.
It would have been even more expensive if it had been made to last. Like, make this out of steel.
Well, maybe. It depends. I mean, it depends on how many of them they made, right?
That's
I mean,
true.
That's
you
true.
know the economy of this.
Sure,
stuff,
sure.
so, yeah.
So there was this game that I had when I was a kid, and it was a hand-me-down from my brother and sister. I don't know who got it, but it was kind of an offshoot of like a Ouija board.
Right.
And first of all, that's a weird thing
Right.
in and of itself. Is it Milton Bradley or Parker Brothers?
I believe it was Milton Bradley.
Okay, but to market that as a game, and it's still, you could go into a store and buy a Ouija board. People still kind of go back and forth on whether it's dangerous or not.
Well, originally it was a party game. I mean, it was just, hey, let's have some fun, and then it got these connotations of, let's contact the dead with it, and
and the idea that you have your hands on it doesn't affect any of the I wonder.
Some people say it does. Some people. I've never experienced it myself, but I know plenty of people that will swear up and down that if people have their hand on it, then the vibration of it will move it around or whatever. Shared collective consciousness thing. I don't know, but
it is funny though that would be, along with all their other games,
Right.
you've got this weird, antiquated relic from spiritualism.
Right. Well, it's
Right.
I'm for that podcast that I do. I've been meaning to get to Ouija board as a topic, and I do remember vaguely, but don't quote me on this, that the reason why they sold Ouija boards was like some sort of business deal they did with like somebody. Like there was somebody who they had the rights to print it, and so they're like, well, as kind of this obligation to the company that they ended up printing it, and it just ended up being this thing that took off.
They had
Wow.
a deal
Yeah.
with Lou Cipher.
Stan something.
Bill Uzabub. So, cut to later,
Right.
I get this toy called Kabbalah,
Right.
which is this strange fortune-telling game, and it's a glow-in-the-dark game.
Right.
And it's on kind of a ball, and so like a Ouija board, everybody puts their hands on it, and there's a marble that goes along a little trough that goes around it. And in the middle, there's this beautiful, like, all-seeing eye. And it's this big black eyeball. And the rest of it glows in the dark.
So that's
you're
pretty
that's
awesome.
cool just in and of itself. So you've got your hands on it, and then the ball would go, as you would move this board, the ball would then land in front of these little tarot cards that surround the game board, and the little marble would land in front of one of these cards, and then you would pick up the card and you'd
That's
read
cool.
your fortune.
That's awesome.
And I don't remember if there was any other point to
What
it
was
than
your
that.
fortune?
You're gonna get ice cream later, or I don't know. Yeah.
Sounds like a great game.
Yeah.
Or wrap up your affairs.
Looking at the box photo of the box, it said fortune telling with tarot cards. Read what your astrological scope predicts. Ask questions. The Eye of Zohar has the answers.
Yeah, it was spooky. It was
That's
really
cool.
It was,
That's a great idea.
To me, it was far spookier than a Ouija board.
Sure.
Like that
Right,
thing.
right.
You had this eye staring at
Yeah,
you.
you have an eye staring at you. You're in the dark,
Right.
and you're picking up these little tarot cards. And I think there was some sort of outcry that parents
Somebody's soul
went,
got
"Hey,
taken
wait
or
a minute! Yeah, right. My
It's too cool and too fun for kids.
the hammer of parental guidance came down. No."
That sounds like a cool thing just to have on your coffee table.
Yeah.
I do,
Yeah.
and that's another thing too. That's one that I would like to find perfect condition.
Yeah, totally.
Just for
Have
the
you ever looked for it?
yeah, and they're expensive.
Yeah.
And they're always, it's like the bane of all our
Missing-
existence. They're always missing
a
something.
tarot
Yeah.
card or the
Yeah.
marble.
Yeah,
or-
yeah.
And I wouldn't even care if I had all the cards. I would just want enough cards to be able to surround it.
I
As
just
long
want
as you
the
had
eye.
ice cream.
As long
Yeah.
as
The eye is
was-
cool,
Yeah.
yeah. Or I could make my own little cards,
Yeah, sure.
or,
Yeah.
or just pictures of myself. Pick the there you go, yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah,
That's
and
gorgeous.
my game would be Eye of Zohar, pick the correct headshot for me. But yeah, it's beautiful. And I want that someday.
Well, maybe one day you'll get it.
Maybe one of my friends will get
Maybe
it
Santa
for me
will
because
bring it.
well, this has been great.
The Eye of Zohar says we are out of time.
Scott, thank you so much for being
Yes,
with us
oh, it's my
tonight.
pleasure.
And
Thank you,
Gina,
Zach. Yeah.
thank you so much
Yes.
for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to
Thanks
be with
for
us.
having me.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
always.
I actually didn't know that you were that advanced with games.
And I want to thank our nephew Lucas too, because
Thank you, Lucas.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Lucas.
he's very knowledgeable about this.
So,
But Scott, you got to come back.
yeah.
All right, I will.
Yeah.
and now, is there anything they're working on that that our listeners can look forward to in the next year or next
Yeah, are
season
you working
or
on the new
something?
tail gunner?
So, I do have a bit of a list.
all right. Go for it.
So, if you're in the Irvine, California area, you can go visit the Terminator Fight for the Future. That is the
Cool.
VR thing that I help make with a group called Spaces.
Let's all go.
I have two books on video game design. One is called Level Up, the Guide to Great Video Game Design.
Cool.
The other is called Swipe This, the Guide to Touchscreen Game Designs. And you can
Okay.
get
Nice.
both of those at Amazon or at Barnes & Noble or wherever fine books are sold.
Cool.
You can buy either of my board games that are currently out. One is called Rayguns and Rocketships. The other is Pantone the Game. You can get those also on Amazon or go to your favorite friendly local gaming store and
Cool.
go and ask for that. As for new projects, I'm always working on new stuff. I have a game that I may or may not kickstart that my daughter helped me create. And she did the art and came up with the original idea when she was 4, and then she did all the art for it when she was 15. And so it's called Castle Climbers. But I'm very risk adverse, so I'm still trying to figure out if I want to.
But if folks like games, I mean, you have a podcast.
Oh yeah, so I do a segment on a podcast. The podcast is called Ludology, and the segment I do one like every 4 or 5 weeks. It's called Biography of a Board Game, and in that I talk about the history, much like I did today, of usually some sort of famous or influential board game. Next week, I believe this Sunday, the new episode goes up with one of my segments in it, and it's about Apples to Apples and Cards Against Humanity. So if you want to learn something about 13 minutes of me prattling on more about board games, listen to it. There's lots of back episodes. I talk about all types of games, and plus the Ludology show is great, particularly if you're interested in the science of game design. That's essentially what the main podcast is about.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, again, Scott, Gina, we want to thank you for being here, and let's have a toast to you and to games.
And Zohar.
And Monster Party.
Time for listener shout out. This goes out to our old friend Evan Archer from Peoria, Illinois.
Evan Archer.
Evan reached out with a message on Twitter. Said, well, guys, you were all there for support when I got married. And now it's time for my wife and I to add a mini monster partier to our group.
Oh,
No.
I'm so happy it went that way.
They said to play music and talk to the baby. So I play Monster Party.
What is this kid going to be like?
That's awesome.
Thanks for everything you guys do. And
That's awesome.
Evan
Congrats.
went so far as to send a picture of the ultrasound Monster Party cat.
Oh, that's great.
And that really is above and beyond.
I wonder what names they're considering. Perhaps maybe Lawrence, maybe?
Maybe James.
Lawrence?
James,
A
perhaps?
little Lawrence? No.
James Matthew Sean Larry.
And if it's a boy? Okay. We also got
Nice one.
We also got a new review on iTunes.
Oh,
Hey.
we didn't.
This comes from Archive Boy.
Archive boy.
He says-
Superhero.
5-star review. He says,
Uh-oh.
I listen to a few podcasts, but I've listened to this the longest, and it's by far my favorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a monster kid, and this podcast is ear crack to me. It's informative.
I've done that.
It's informative and laugh out loud funny. Movies, TV, toys. Sean, Matt, Larry, and James cover it all. I hope
I'm glad my name comes first right there.
Wow.
Oh, wait. I read,
Finally winning.
I read it wrong. James, Matt.
Oh, okay.
I hope someday they get to monster models from Aurora on up through Weirdos and Garage Kits.
Ooh, model
that's a
model
good-
kits.
well,
We
maybe.
can do that.
Yeah,
I think we can do that.
We've talked about in different patches, like, but
But
one whole thing,
model
the
kits,
history.
Period.
of
That is
monsters,
a
that could be-
great
And then we could also
idea.
add like garage kits and that kind
Totally.
of stuff too. Yeah.
That is a
idea.
great idea.
Yeah, I love
Thank
it.
you, Archive Boy.
Yeah.
All right.
We're gonna archive that one.
All right, we'll do it right now.
Let's also remind our listeners that you can find us on Facebook and YouTube at Monster Party TV. On Twitter, we are at Monster Party HQ. Instagram is also Monster Party HQ. We are now also on Google Play Music and Spotify
Spotify.
For the kids.
for the kids.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to us on iTunes, please do take a moment and write a review, just like Archive Boy. And chances are we will read it on the air.
We will.
Let's also remind, we will, let's face it. Let's also remind our listeners that we will be at Monsterpalooza in Pasadena.
Yes, we will.
April,
Coolest convention ever.
yes,
Yeah.
April 12th, 13th, and 14th, right around the corner. We will have our own booth, so please come by and say hi
Yeah.
and chat with us on the mic and maybe buy some Monster Party merch.
Yeah.
You can also find said merch at our eBay store, which is Monster Party Store, easy to remember. Let's also thank our listeners, the ones who went out and bought our commentary on the Scream Factory Blu-ray of Hammer's Vengeance of She.
Vengeance
Yeah.
of She.
We got some good-
Vengeance of
yeah, we got some good
She.
reactions to that. Yeah.
Yes, we
And
did.
a lot of supportive listeners went out and
Yes.
pre-ordered it and bought it.
Yeah.
We really appreciate that. And if you're listening,
We're a
you-
hit.
We are.
our name in lights. And thank you. And
Spread the word.
spread the word.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tell people about the Vengeance of She.
Well, and mention that the commentary by the Monster Party guys.
Yeah.
That's what makes
Yeah.
it.
Lead with that.
Yes. Well, hey, I just want to give a special thanks out to Creature Features.
Creature Features.
Creature Features. Look, they're still selling a ton of stuff on eBay. Go to creaturefeatures.com and you'll find a little box. You click it, it'll take you directly to their eBay store. They're still selling all kinds of stuff like CDs and DVDs, Blu-rays, models, statuettes, all kinds of things to satisfy all your monster needs.
It'll be like playing a game. Go in and choose what you want to buy.
That's
yeah.
right.
Oh, that's a good game. I play that all the
favorite game.
time.
It'll also give you information on any kind of events that they're putting together. So go to creaturefeatures.com, check out their website.
Okay.
I also wanted to give a special shout out to Time Tunnel Toys.
Time Tunnel Toys.
Time Tunnel Toys, who will also be at Monsterpalooza. By the
How do you
way.
like that?
Yeah. Time Tunnel Toys are located at 1583 Meridian Avenue in San Jose, California. And Joe and Sharon, they have a spectacular store filled with all kinds of vintage toys, records, games, comic books, and games. Yes. Go to their website, Time Tunnel Toys, and you'll give you all the information about their antique toy convention that they have every 4 months. So check it out, Time Tunnel Toys.
On that note, I am Matt Weinhold.
I'm Shawn Sheridan.
I'm Larry Strothe.
And I'm James Gonis.
Keep America strong.
Go out and play some games. The Eye of Zohar commands it. We should talk. You should be talking to him.
I am talking to him.
I thought you were talking to him.
Well,
He is indirectly talking to me.
Oh, I know that
It
one.
was directed
Where you
at-
look at someone else, but you're really talking about him.
Type of
think I-
ventriloquism.
because I think
Don't worry about any of that noise. You don't really hear it.
Putting up with it anymore.
Oh,
Wow.
Oh.
That's like it's like just throw.
It's amateur hour.
Yes.
I know.
Is this amateur hour?
Not anymore.
No.
Not
No,
anymore.
it wasn't amateur hour ages ago.
Look, I'm gonna elevate it. Okay.
You know what?
You guys have your own branded thingies. You're not
So much-
amateurs.
Yeah.
Oh, the branding.
So look, Scott.
Put a,
Yeah.
a branded box around your
We,
microphone.
yeah, look. Once you get the login information to Vistaprint, the world is your oyster.
Now this is all very funny. Now, Scott, just
But hey, look, hey, Mr. Condescension, I'm going to go to the bathroom, and then you can say whatever bullshit you want to our guest. Okay?
Okay, sure.
Okay?
Sure.
I have to go drop a Larry, so I'll be right back.
So while he's doing that, so I just want to let you know you have headphones. We want to make sure that you get close to the mic.
Yes.
It's like you're Elvis, okay?
I will
Because that
eat
is
the mic.
way too far.
Yeah, I know.
There,
I will eat the mic.
there you go.
You've done
so
these
you can
before.
kind of
I'm loud,
You can kind of
actually.
put it to the side and yeah.
So I didn't want to blast.
No. Blast it because
So blast away.
he has the ability to tone you down if he
Well,
wants.
I don't want it to fall off the table.
Yeah.
So I will get in a little.
And Gina,
closer.
you okay over there? You got your cocktail.
She's
and-
got
Everything okay? Come out all right?
Man, I feel like a weight has lifted from my bowels.
All right.
plummeted.
I just wanted to give a nice.
Do you mind if I lower? Would it help if I lower? this?
No, do whatever you want. Make it. Here, you want me to?
So Gina. Oh yeah. We'll put him right here in the center.
What is that?
That's a Portal guy.
Yep.
Portal 2.
Oh, Portal. Yes, that's a game.
God, you guys are. So
I hear that's a game.
right here,
You have your
right in
own
the
language.
center.
It's okay. You guys have your, your
Awesome.
Ultraman and your Ghidras
Buster
and-
Crab
And so
You know,
James,
yeah, Buster Crab. Yeah,
Crash
yeah,
Corrigan.
Right. and-
James, help me out here. Can you
Excellent.
tell her to put those in the back?
Tell her.
Well,
Wow.
because from
right there.
No. From his perspective, I
You
can't
speak, lady. Can you talk to her? Keep in mind too that anything that you say during the show, if you want it,
expunged?
yes, we can do that for you.
Yeah, I'll try not to say anything too incriminating.
But if you do,
But
and
if
go,
you do-
"Oh,
I
I think
will,
after
yeah.
like,
Take your time.
Yeah, if you
man, I
on your
should've-
way home, if you go, wait a minute, I shouldn't
Yeah,
have
okay.
said that
Thank
about
you.
Larry.
And then I assume
you can
it's,
say anything about me. It's
swear-
totally fine. Yes.
Swears are fine. and-
Oh, swearing is encouraged.
I mean,
We are T for teen.
Okay.
I mean,
all right.
I mean, look, this isn't Quentin Tarantino hour, but sure. I mean, if you feel like you want to throw in something that,
Yeah.
but it's
if you've been just holding in a cocksucker all day, let it out here.
I do
it's a
teach
safe zone.
children, so yes, I probably have one.
You probably do. Yeah. No.
We're all leisure suit Larrys here.
Ah, nice.
Very good.
Yeah.
Just learned what that was.
I don't know what that means.
Because I brought it up because of
It was in the
this,
Goldbergs.
and it was on the Goldberg.
There you go.
Exact game that I was telling him about.
Synchronicity. You are
Goldbergs.
tuned into what all the kids are into. The leisure, they're with their leisure suit Larrys and King Quests.
Yeah, I barely remember that game.
Archons and
Is anybody still playing that game? Leisure Suit Larry, is that like a 90s thing? Or is that-
it was a
80s, right?
thing, and then they brought it back in the mid 2000s, and it did poorly.
Huh.
and
Interesting.
it stopped.
Yeah.
Sadly.
That's
Yeah.
great.
A little
That's
Super
great, Gina.
Empire, a little Super Star Wars in there as well. Or?
Yeah,
I know,
that's
I know.
you know what?
Some
Here, give me
Gyros,
one.
yeah.
Just give me one. Give me anything. No, the other one. Give me that one.
I'm not doing
DS.
Mario.
Okay, no. This is good. This is good. Okay, you can just put the rest down because we're gonna look at them later. Well, we've got. I don't want. What if that spills?
Mine's still in the
How
package,
about
so.
I move it? So it's
No. This is cool. You know.
not.
All right. Okay, I like it. I like what's happening.
Oh, on top of there. Yeah.
Put it on top. All right, I love it. I'll show you my Cthulhu Wars game.
Is that a metaphor?
Yes. She knows what I mean.
So Scott, the only thing, and for Gina, if somewhere like if we're going and we're at about an hour or so, and you need to use the restroom or something, just say, "Hey guys, can we just stop?" We'll just stop
Yeah.
and
Try to
take
find
a break.
a clean out, but
No, but we'll stop and come back. Take a little moment. Okay.
All right, I'll clench.
yeah. Now use it. All right, ready?
We test. Are we good with our
Test,
levels?
test. Good.
Test.
Level,
Can you
level.
hear
Test,
it?
test.
I think it all sounds
Test.
great.
Level?
And Gina,
Everybody
you're
sounds
comfortable?
good?
I feel like you're leaning.
Sibilance, sibilance.
Pull it closer.
We're getting close.
The quick brown
Pull it
fox.
we could also. Oh, that one doesn't raise. I can give you mine because I'm tiny. So if you want,
You're tiny?
Probably too far away.
I am. I'm a piglet of a
You
man.
can get
Test.
close so you don't have to
Test.
lean in.
No.
on it.
You're no piglet.
I'm a borrower.
I know Piglet, and trust me, you're no Piglet. Do you know Piglet? Travis?
Which one are we talking about here?
Travis Piglet?
No, I don't know
He's
this.
the voice actor for Piglet.
Oh
He's
no,
great.
I don't know.
He's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's fantastic. He loves board games too. He's a huge.
And he's probably like 7 feet tall, right?
He's like, well, he's a big man.
Okay.
He's not a piglet of a man.
Yeah.
He's not even a huffalump of a man. He is like huge.
The voice actor for Piglet back in the day
Was
was.
I'm
his
blanking on his name.
He was in The Odd Couple.
No, it's not that guy. Is it?
Sterling
I thought-
Holloway was Pooh.
Sterling Holloway was
Sterling
Pooh.
Holloway.
And
He was
then
Pooh.
the guy
He was
with
Pooh.
Piglet was I forget.
Renchek. Right? That's that guy.
I don't know.
From Star Trek.
Wait.
You remember the bald guy
Yeah.
in Wolf in the Fold?
Yes.
Come on, Larry.
Yes. No, I know the guy.
Fielder.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
That's who we were thinking of, right?
He's in everything.
Yeah.
Shawn Sheridan.
Die.
He's Gordy the Ghoul in Go Check the Night Stalker. He was the morgue guy that he
Huh?
paid money
Huh?
to.
Look at that.
All right.
You see who you're playing with here.
I got up my
Ask
game.
us about anything involving a game, though. It's like,
It's good. I'll have my chance to shine.
All right, good.
Thank you.
All right, let's do this.
All right.
So just really quickly, so Matt is kind of like do a little
Yeah.
introduction.
This is Crypt
We
Keeper.
we introduce ourselves. We say what the topic, and then we're gonna do an introduction. That's fine. And then we'll do another introduction, and then we'll go to town. Okay.
We'll quietly zone out until you guys are ready.
That's what we all do. Okay.
I don't do that. I am alert.
come on.
I no.
Shut up.
Tone out. Toned. I am like on pins and needles.
You know Tom Baker
Yes.
from Doctor Who?
Yeah. Look, I'm not a moron.
All right, okay.
The guy
but
with the scarf.
The guy with the scarf, correct. Tom Baker would only learn his lines. He would not even read the rest of the script because his excuse was that he wanted everything to be a surprise. But I think it was simply just blah, 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 me.
No, I didn't know that
right.
about him.
But it does work.
Yeah,
It does, yeah.
Is he very me?
Kinda.
But he's so charming. Though.
But that's part of his charm. He's open with
It's
it.
Doctor Who, for God's sake.
Yeah, he's a
It's not
Time
like-
Lord. Come on.
Man deserves a little blah blah.
Thank you. All right, here we go. Ready?
So you got to check out their website, Time Tunnel Toys. It'll also give you information about their upcoming their San Jose Super Toy. Go to their website.
There's a little Lou Costello there almost.